Reality Bytes.
Welcome to Reality Bytes Radio on the 7th of March 2021, and regular listeners to this broadcast will know that that's not our regular intro tune, and many listeners will also recognise that it's the intro tune for Alan Watts cuttingthroughthematrix.com and his normal Sunday broadcast, and the tune of course is Jerry Rafferty and Baker Street. I don't know what Alan's association with that tune was at all, but he played it at the beginning and the end of each show, so I just thought I'd put it on today because of Alan's sad passing on Thursday, the 4th of March. I got a call on Friday from somebody close to Alan who's known him for a number of years to give me the news. I'm not going to go into any details of what happened to him or anything like that. That's a private thing. But yeah, Alan Watts died on Thursday, March 4th, and he will be sadly missed by many, many people, and in fact already is missed by many people who knew of his passing. But what can you say about the man? I possibly started first listening to Alan maybe 15, 16 years ago, and I came across our first radio interview together, and it was back in 2011, so 10 years ago, as far as I'm aware, was the first one that we did, and I think we did another 24, 25 after that. Not many over 10 years, but still, there were some gaps in between where I didn't do radio at all, so possibly could have done more, but they are what they are. And I have to say that Alan, maybe purely because he was Scottish as well, inspired me, if that's the right word to use, to actually take up radio myself. And I can remember the first time, not particularly what we talked about, but I can remember the first time speaking to Alan and being really, really nervous because I thought this man knows so much stuff and I'm going to screw this up. But we didn't screw it up. We seemed to, I don't know, just hit it off together, and the conversations tended to flow more or less by themselves, with Alan's depth of knowledge just being so incredible that it didn't really matter what I said. And I said many times, nobody was on here to listen to me. They were on to listen to him. But it wouldn't matter what question you asked them or what point you made. Alan would always have an answer for it. His depth of knowledge was so profound, so precise on a wide range of topics. You could talk to him about anything at all, really. But as I got to know him better, and we had some private telephone calls, etc., which again could have made great radio shows in and of themselves. But other people would remark that, oh, Alan, you never give us any good news. You're all doom and gloom. Well, Alan gave his views as he saw them, and I don't think the subjects that we talk about, there's really any leeway for masking, if we want to use that term, masking the depths of horror that we're evidently going into now, which Alan has been talking about for many, many years. And I agree wholeheartedly with him on that point. I don't think there's any point dressing it up at all in any way, shape or form. But he did have a sense of humour, of course, and that came across in some of his own talks as well, and the conversations we had off air, telephone conversations or whatever. He had a sense of humour. What can you say? What can you say? He had been on a number of radio shows over many, many years, but he hadn't really done an awful lot. And we were very, very fortunate that he agreed to come on. At one point, it was every month, and he never shied away from doing a broadcast. He was always make himself available. And at times we had technical problems, and he would sort them out for us in the background because we couldn't manage to do it ourselves because we didn't actually know what was going on. But I think our last talk together was September 30th last year, and due to my work situation I couldn't do radio for a few months, but we had planned to have a chat fairly soon and organise another broadcast, but sadly that can't happen. So I'm sure people, if they're in the chat box, will have something to say about Alan and have their own views, and it'd be interesting to hear them or see them. I'm not looking at the chat box at the moment, but my wife is. But again, Alan's. I don't think there's anyone in what can loosely be called a truth movement. I don't think anyone has Alan's depth of knowledge and or commitment to what he was doing. So it's as I say, it's a sad day. I never thought for a second I would have to do an announcement like this on radio. It's not something that even entered my mind. But what can you say? A gentleman. I never heard him actually get angry on air. Maybe, I think back in the day when he used to take calls, there were some people who came on that were just there to cause trouble, and he got them off the line pretty quickly, and I think that was right as well. And then he just went on to doing his own broadcast without the phone-ins and stuff, which ended up being the ones he's doing now, over 4 hours long every week. And I personally know the effort that takes, because to do 2 hours a week is bad enough, but to do, I think his last talk was over 4.5 hours. And Alan, unlike myself, as I've mentioned many times, I don't read the full articles. I generally read the headline and maybe the first paragraph or something. But Alan would meticulously read everything. And if you just imagine the amount of links that he puts into his every show that he does, that he did, the amount of reading involved, and the articles he obviously read which weren't posted, which he didn't use in his shows. There's all that stuff, all the books to read, the many, many years of life it takes to garner that knowledge, and to give it away for nothing. Unlike many of the, shall we call them, stars of the so-called truth movement, who have $1 million studios and things like that. That doesn't come about by accident. And I think if there was ever a better use of the word philanthropist, you could give it to Alan Watt for the amount of free information he gave out over many, many years. A true servant of humanity and the world. And I hope one day he's thanked for it and remembered for it. Certainly be remembered amongst people who listened to him for a number of years. But I hope someday, if we get through this current nonsense that's going on, get through it one way or another, and hopefully come out the other side better, if we can stop it. But I hope Alan will be remembered as somebody very, very important who helped to bring that about. Because if we get through this and things do go our way, which I'm not very hopeful of, but you never know. You never know. If they do go our way, then I think Alan Watt will have been a huge part of that process. And I think his talks, old and new, will still be relevant, regardless of what happens. And I think there's things in those talks going back years and years where he's talked about this day coming, where the vaccine passports, all the rest of it, the genetically modified vaccines, all of it was spoken about many, many years ago. And there was certainly no conspiracy theorist. Anybody can throw that label about, but Alan wasn't somebody who said things without evidence. And I try to do the same myself, because that's all you can do. If you got the actual documents in front of you and somebody calls you a conspiracy theorist, well, you know where they're coming from. And Alan certainly made a point of using the enemy's own words to hang themselves with. I think we need some rope at the moment for them to hang themselves with, but that's another issue. So, Alan Watt, again, he will be sadly missed by many, many people, and I'm sure there's people listening to this who can't quite believe he's gone. But unfortunately he has, and we'll just have to take his work and keep pushing it out there if we can. And I know there's going to be some kind of notice put on his websites. They're still going to be kept going. All that material will still be there for people to look at, and from what I understand, it's going to be updated every week or so by people behind the scenes who are going to look after that. So, and there will possibly be new material going up, which Alan was in the process of completing, which I've been told will be completed wherever possible, I suppose. Maybe some of it can't be, but who knows? We shall see what turns up. So I think that's all I've got to say.
I'm Alan Watt, and I've been following politics and geopolitics for a good part of my life. I didn't start off deliberately going out to find out everything that was possibly going on. In fact, I had no idea, to be honest with you, how vast the scale of an agenda, a political agenda, is when you're bringing in a global society. Wars have many different purposes. Economics is only simply one big part of it, but cultural change and the building of empire through the defeated nations joining in leagues. Every country was basically signing the same laws, and had been my whole life, at the same time, that affected their societies. Laws were introduced and bills were introduced unbeknownst to the people in those countries that it was being introduced in their neighboring countries or even across the water somewhere at the same time. I realized there was already a governmental control, obviously, that coordinated all of this, and it led me into the United Nations. For every single department of government you have on a federal, local, county, state, provincial level, the United Nations had an equivalent department to deal with everything. It was already set up, in fact, to be global government. H.G. Wells said at the League of Nations, which was the embryo for the United Nations, he said, this is the nucleus of the world governments, when eventually all laws will come from there, be passed and signed into law by treaty of all the member countries. Eventually, we won't even have to go through the farce, and that's what it is, of voting in parties or candidates, because in the latter part of the 20th century and now into the 21st century, we're being trained, rather obviously, to simply accept rule by experts, rule by scientists, rule by professionals, and that's what they mean when they call governance. That's the term used. How do you get a domesticated herd to move from a field, a system in which it's been grazing for 20, 50 years, this kind of system, to this field over here, this new field? Because we have reluctance to change. We like familiarity, we like routine, you see. You do it by various techniques, one of which is revolution. Most revolutions are bloodless. You have cultural revolutions, sexual revolutions. Along with that comes the music revolutions, etc. These literally are designed to alter and direct culture, knowing what kind of culture they'll have at the very end of it too. They know exactly what kind of culture they want to come out of it. You also can do it through crisis creation. Crisis after crisis has been hit on the people of the world since 9/11 happened. And we must understand that the techniques that are used abroad are also used at home in warfare. And we heard the term shock and awe. Shock and awe on the hard force level, as they call it, is bombs, all kinds of acoustic equipment to nullify enemies, scare the hell out of them through voice to skull and so on, which was used in Gulf War I, and it's all over the British media. But you can also use shock and awe on your domestic people again. You do it by crisis after crisis until the public are so terrified. See, the average person has a sort of confidence that they build up where they think, I can manage most things that come my way. Whatever little crisis in my life, what happens to other people, I can deal with. When all those around you are getting scared at the same time as you because they're losing their jobs, they've been threatened with pandemics, terrorists everywhere, terrifying people to even get on subways, and so on. And all those around you, as I say, are also in the same boats. You tend to be more easily directed by the powers that be that come out and speak with authority and confidence over you. That's why they give you a guy like Obama, who's trained in oratory. He was trained in oratory, not in truth, but in oratory, the technique of persuasion. Shock and awe, as I say, is a technique of making a person and a whole population punch drunk. And each one of those fears, you understand, the average person can handle one major crisis in their personal life, maybe two at the same time. It's understood in psychology and many, many studies that if you have maybe 3 to 4 crises hitting you personally in your life at the same time, you will literally go into an incredible depression, a reactive depression. You can't cope. That's understood. Apply that technique on a whole population. The thing is, there's not one of these crises that we're being told about that you personally can do anything about. What can you do about terrorism if it really exists all over the place? It's out of your hands, you're helpless. What can you do about a coming pandemic? It's out of your hands, you're helpless. What can you do about a nuke getting set off in New York Harbor or wherever? You can't, you're helpless. The message you're getting is that you're utterly helpless to defend, help, or save yourself. That is complete shock and awe tactic. It's been used not only in the US and Canada, but across the world. Same strategy, because we're already global with the global society running us all. Massive psychology and warfare techniques in psychology has been used across the planet to make us succumb to fear and crises, as I say, and none of which we can actually do anything about on an individual level. Therefore, the leaders are presented to us on screen with uniforms or business suits and ties as politicians who speak with confidence, all scripted, of course, and they seem to have everything under control. You're now basically a fearful slave looking up to the powerful master to defend and protect you. That's the simple technique of it. I've been speaking about the Rockefeller Foundation. I was mentioning the fact that in the United States, the Rockefeller Foundation, which also runs, I think it is the Carnegie Foundation today, maybe even the Ford, they're all combined. The families that are given the intergenerational rights, if you like, or authority to lead the world to amalgamation under global governance. Mr. Rockefeller also is heavily involved in the world depopulation strategies. He funds abortion clinics across the planet. He also funds hundreds of other front foundations that you would think were independent from his, but they're actually front foundations. He funds them all through his money. You can trace them all back again to so-called family planning clinics across the entire globe, especially in the third world countries. It seems that Mr. Rockefeller is intensely worried about overpopulation in the near future from countries which will have no industry, etc. And he sees it as his right to start the decimating process, basically, of depopulation. Last winter, I got an invitation to attend something called the World's Citizenship Council, the annual meeting. That kind of floored me because the head of the World Citizenship Council is Mr. Rockefeller himself. And here I am speaking out about and against them. So this did not come out of the blue. They try and get you on board working for them. What was also more startling was they always give members maybe 15 minutes or 20 minutes to speak, and I was offered that to speak on stage to this world meeting. The world's citizenship idea is part of the old idea of Cecil Rhodes up into Lord Milner to the Royal Institute for International Affairs and the Council on Foreign Relations. Mr. Rockefeller is up on Google in some of his conferences giving out World Citizenship Awards to very famous people. So they've already bypassed and have bypassed sovereign nations a long time ago. What other benefits you get from being a world citizen, I'm not certain at all. But I was allowed, he said I'd be allowed to speak at this conference. He did not say what to speak about, or didn't say anything about what not to speak about. And he also said that, this chairman, of course, who wrote to me, he also said that I'd be allowed to participate in the round table groups which come after. The round table society is very, very important because the round table societies were set up as far back as the Milner Society and the Rhodes Foundation. They came out with the first round table societies. What they do is take the topics that are discussed at the main meetings, then they split off different tables to specialize in certain aspects of the speeches they've heard and find ways how to implement them into reality through media, promotion, various methods of propaganda and so on. I did not attend. I was tempted to go just to see if they would ask me not to speak about certain things, but it was the middle of winter and the journey to this university would have been pretty hectic anyway, and I was so busy. But you will be approached, and that's not the first time I've been approached to do this kind of thing. You'll find that some people are bought over. I should go back to Lord Bertrand Russell on this topic, because Lord Bertrand Russell said in one of his own books, the same book in fact, where he talks about those children who manage to escape the indoctrinations, who have intelligence and an ability to communicate to others, must be brought on board the system, employed by the system, bribed into the system if possible. That generally works with most people. He said, otherwise we shall have to eliminate them, because they did not want people around who understood an agenda that the general public are unaware of. Didn't want these people with the ability to communicate information, documented information, in a fashion that people understand out in the community where they could spread this word. That ties in with Mao Zedong, who said he was not afraid of armies. His worst fear was someone with a good idea, a great idea, a unique idea, and the ability to communicate it. So that is how they treat basically people with information. First comes invitation to join them. Many people do. As I say, Bertrand Russell backed that up by saying if they can't be brought on board, they must be literally eliminated from the public arena. That's how seriously they take this agenda at the top. They don't mess it around. The reason I think they don't simply come out and kill you straightforward is they don't have to do a messy job. There's many ways of killing you, especially in this day and age. But I think, to be honest, they're so arrogant right now at this moment. They're not too worried about the mass of the general population who are indoctrinated and updated with their indoctrination daily from television, as one example. About 100 years ago, this big organization with many branches, they wanted to rule the world basically using Britain as a nucleus of a system, an embryo, which also was going to be joined with the US under the Anglo-American establishment, wrote about the kind of culture and the changes of culture over a 100-year period that they would actually design. We're all tribal to an extent. That's why we even bother to vote for a tribal leader. This is well understood. That's why we're supplied with these leaders. And because the average man was to become more disengaged from his own destiny as the expert class arose, it was decided that the males would get their outlet, basically, gradually becoming helpless as males, through sports. Therefore, they'd have a tribal team they could identify with. They could cheer them on as though they were winning. In their own personal lives, they were getting nowhere. They were getting disenfranchised, in a sense, as experts took over decision-making for them in all kinds of fields. So this was psychology at use, planned before they even implemented the sports. When radio came along, of course, they used that to the maximum. Sports for the men, radio soaps basically for the women, and then in came television, as I say, with its alpha state, its hypnotic state. It took off. It really took off. And men became glued to the sports shows. The big think tanks, and we've had think tanks to do with always planning the future and how they would create societies and even different cultures within 100 years, say, from this type of society to that society to the next society, how they'd implement it, again, always through the youth culture, which is easy to do if you have universal education. You can always mandate the same system, same culture to be taught to the youth. However, as I say, since the 1960s, once television really took off, sports used to only come out on Saturdays, and over a 10-year period, it gradually came on every night of the week. Until today, we have even sports channels, sports. So now you see guys who are sitting home, who are basically powerless at work. They have bosses. They're powerless on the roads. There's police and traffic wardens and cops watching them. They have no means to feel strong, and so they tend to watch sports as a substitute. They project themselves into a game which they never participate in, but as long as their team wins, they feel something's happening in their life that's positive and it's successful. It's a very good substitute for many things as far as the elite are concerned. Now, the big think tanks that involved many professional people knew that they'd have to give something this for the males, and for the women they'd also give a substitute too. The intention being ultimately to alter society, drastically alter it so much that even the purpose, for instance, of marriage would lose any appeal. For the females, they gave them high fashion, accessible prices for high fashion clothes. They brought in, people don't realize, they brought in the miniskirt back in the 1920s during Prohibition. They brought in cocaine at the same time along with the booze to get young people in. The idea being that if you're doing something illegal, it's very naughty. Youngsters love to break the rules, get together, we're all being naughty together, and sex and booze, coupled with coke being smuggled in at that time, had its desired effects, but not quite the way it was designed to have by those that planned that culture, the Bernays types. And Bernays was heavily involved in this. So they came out, as I say, with not sex and rock and roll, but sex in a form of jazz. The Charleston dance came in, the miniskirt came in, sex became rather rampant for the first time. All the old traditional taboos were broken with one generation, but there was fallout to this change, this massive change in culture. The fallout being that they did not have the antibiotics to treat all the sexually transmitted disease that came along. Secondly, they didn't have the legal abortion clinics to take care of the unwanted children that also were produced by hyper-promiscuity. They opened up big orphanages to try and take care of this, the boys' towns. They had ones for girls too. But there was so much backlash, especially in the United States, from the old Christian communities, that they had to tone it all down. It kind of flopped, as I say. Sexually transmitted disease became rampant, so did unwanted pregnancies and abortions. And so they went back to the drawing board, because remember, before this all happened, the big players, the new high priesthood, we'll call them, of the Time Lords, those who create the future, work in think tanks for the big establishment, had a definite mandate. The only problem was how do you achieve that mandate over a time period. So they went back to the drawing board, and they've always known, for instance, that in wartime, more children are produced because young people who might go off to die tomorrow tend to be far more promiscuous. They brought this back after World War II big time and worked on it steadily. All their tax money went into one particular area of research, not just for the atomic weaponry and so on. It went into finding ways of finding a contraceptive that was effective. When they found it and launched it on the scene, at the same time as they launched what they called pop music, along with drugs, LSD and so on, they brought out the contraceptive. So then permission was given, in a sense, and promoted from the top down, even from the BBC, which is, remember, the BBC is owned by the British government. It's an arm of the British government. It talks on behalf of the dominant minority who rule Britain. So they began to promote all this stuff. All the DJs they'd bring on television would interview the top pop stars of the day. They were all stoned out their minds. Some of them were falling out of chairs. And the interviewers would say, "Tee-hee, aren't we naughty children?" All aimed at a young generation to emulate. This is what we do. Monkey see, monkey do. Once again, remember, the prime intent was to break the old culture of boy meets girl, going together for a while, getting engaged, getting married, having children. The family unit, they'd said, when they had the League of Nations, which was the precursor of the United Nations, said they'd have to destroy the family unit. Pretty well all of H.G. Wells's non-fiction books promotes all of this agenda. And in fact, he coined the term in the late 1800s. This is how far back this agenda of promiscuity had to go. He coined the term free love. And in one of his books written before 1890, he says, we must promote free love in order to destroy and end the obsolete family unit. Once that's done, he said, the family is no longer in the way when government comes for an individual. Each individual will be solely responsible to the government itself, and no family will stand up around them like a primitive tribe and defend them. At the same time, the foundations within the United States and Britain and elsewhere were funding what appeared to be far left groups, communist groups. So much so, as I say, the Rees Commission went in to look into this from the 50s to find out why top capitalists who owned international corporations and banks, international banks, were putting up foundations to fund far left groups. Well, we know now it was to literally destroy the old culture in order to bring in the new culture, the new society. So therefore you have the proliferation of sexual activity. The fallout still came from unwanted pregnancies, far reduced than it had before because of contraception. But then came the lead of the feminist charge, again funded by the Rockefeller Foundation in the States, to spearhead and demonstrate and demand the rights for abortion. If they could get the public to devalue human life, and that's in the writings of Julian Huxley. He says if we can get society to devalue human life, he says, and take humanity off its pedestal as a supreme being on the planet, then, he said, we can bring in our controlled society with a workable population. Everything works within culture towards an agenda. And as Plato said so long ago, over 2,300 years ago, he said, culture and cultural changes must be authorized from the top. If it's grassroots, truly grassroots, then it's outside of the elite's control, and ripple effects could occur and it could spread anywhere. They couldn't control it, contain it anymore. Therefore, the major changes in culture, which Plato said came through drama and the emulation of actors, actresses, including fashions that they wore, and the music they heard, had to be strictly regulated and authorized from the top. The whole science of this, which was always a science, and understood by those in those businesses, was used to the maximum to literally drastically alter culture so radically in the 60s and 70s that they could never return to a past way of living. We tie that in with another big player, Lord Bertrand Russell, who had experimental schools under royal charter, where he could do things that anyone else would be locked up for doing. He said in his own schools, and there were mixed schools, he said that if he could encourage pre-pubertal sexuality amongst the children, encourage multiple partners from before puberty, he says the chances, because of study and observation, the chances of them ever bonding with one person for the rest of their life was pretty well obsolete, null and void, wouldn't happen. Therefore, that technique all came into play during the 60s. It was called free love. Drugs helped it along the way. And that was the beginning of what we saw as short-term relationships. Divorces became more and more common. Interestingly enough, divorces really took off not because society demanded it or it came from a need or demand from the people. Divorces took off because the Hollywood stars, and remember too, the drama industry, the entertainment industry, have always said this, the people follow the stars. And they're the guiding stars in the so-called occult, you see. We tend to worship wealth and people and famous people. We want to be like them. We want to identify with them. The whole idea of divorces came out from Hollywood, the top stars leading the charge for this. Women started to talk about it, who was getting divorced, what actress from what guy, and so on. And gradually it put the idea across to them that, well, if they're getting divorced, then maybe so should I. At the same time, the Bernays techniques were used through all kinds of magazines. At that time, 97% of all magazine publications were aimed at women. Because advertisers have said, and it's still taught in marketing schools today, women are far more easy to get to go along with something new than males are. So within all these magazines and write-ups about their famous actresses, their heroines and so on, the rich ones, the average women were reading these stories and identifying with them. They were being told that you can do anything, you can have it all. You could have a career, you can have a family, you had a home. They gave them utter lies, and they coined the term superwoman. So across the whole of Europe and the States and Canada, at the same time, always coordinated at the same time, the media entertainment industry were promoting stories of superwomen. And they'd find someone, real or imaginary, we'll never know, who supposedly was a CEO of a company, who had all these children at home, had a great husband, could manage everything and could cook great cuisine, blah, blah. And that, of course, is a fantasy. This put pressure again on most women to try and live up to the fantasy, as all advertising does. And most of the stuff we're getting is advertising, or at the very least is basic psychological manipulation. Bernays' techniques again. Remembering too that he called it the creation of a consumer society. Well-behaved people, as long as there's money going around, they would go into the material world and they would forgo having children. That's the same thing as Charles Galton Darwin talks about. If we can encourage the woman and the male to go after the material benefits of the world, there's a slimmer chance they'll actually have children who tend to be economically burdensome. People were addicted to television in a very short space of time. Most people still today think that all entertainment to do with movies, drama, is therefore nothing more than their entertainment. It never ever was that case. The greatest social messages are promoted through movies and drama, high drama, through the fixation of emotive sequences, emotional sequences, not logical, factual sequences, but pushing points across in an emotional way which register and fix in the mind. So emotional content is very, very important rather than going through an actual discussion or an argument using logic and facts. There's no debate. And when you're being downloaded through fiction, your guard is down, the censor part of your brain is not in action as you would in a debate or a lecture. You're actually in an alpha state being completely downloaded with new ideas. Very similar to a computer. And so therefore a culture industry, which is called by its own the culture industry. The Soviet Union had a department called the culture industry. Their actors and directors were called the cultural leaders. All you have to do is keep giving them new updates every so often, and you can change an entire country or a nation or a block of nations who are all getting the same upgrades at the same time along certain paths. Today we call it political correctness. Most people want to belong to their peer group. They want to be the same as everyone else when it comes to opinions. In fact, they judge their own personal sanity by bouncing ideas off their neighbors and friends who will answer back and agree on these same topics in kind. It doesn't matter if the topics or what you're given are facts or utter nonsense, as long as everyone agrees at the same time. You'll say, well, I'm sane, and your friends will all agree because they've had the same information given to them. We don't only get the same information given to us, we're led through sequences, even documentaries, to leave you with a predetermined fixed conclusion on any given topic. Most folk are, once again, unaware of this. They think, I've just been given all the facts on this topic, and this is the obvious conclusion, which is always given to you by the final experts on the particular program. There's no thinking involved. We tie this in with the Brzezinski. Brzezinski said in 2 Ages, now this guy was way up with the NSA. He's a master geopolitician. He admits he works in 20, 50-year periods to do with geopolitics in other countries. But he said himself, the public will shortly be unable to think or reason for themselves. He says he was meaning by the form of information that was given to them, the type, the formulas that were in use then in the 1970s. And eventually, he said, they will expect the media to do all their thinking and reasoning for them. Well, that's happened today. That's why people today can't think outside of their programming from television. I'll give an instance, in fact, of why TV was so important, to show you that it was so important to have it in the homes of ordinary people. Now, most countries in Europe, for instance, up into the 1950s and 60s, and I'll give an example, is Britain. The working class people did not have credit cards. You could not get a credit card. You couldn't get a bank loan without collateral to put something up against it. So therefore you were at pretty well a fixed income. There was no extra cash outside of rent, food and so on, clothes for the children, essentials. There was no extras for luxuries. There was no credit given to them. Yet the British government, just like the Chinese government did 2 years ago, made it a mandate that every household in Britain must get a television set. And what they did, they made one exception out of all the things that the people could really needed. They made one exception. They allowed credit companies to come into being. They could go round the houses every week and collect half a crown or 5 shillings or whatever it was and pay off a used television set. The British government made a deal with the United States of America to buy in used televisions which were then reconditioned to be sold to the working class all across Britain. As I say, they wanted a TV in every home. Now, since when is government interested in how happy you are at home? You know, there's another reason for this. And sure enough, the working classes all got these DER. DER was the company that brought them all into Britain. And the guys came around every weekend collecting their half crown, 5 shillings. And suddenly this, and I can remember where I was, it was one of the last areas really to get television, a real working class area. I can remember this high being taken by my parents to the local park on a weekend and passing dozens and dozens and dozens of other couples on the way with their toddlers as well. When he got to the park, which was a valley, there were over maybe 1,500 couples along the grass in the valley. And that's where everything was discussed. Local politics, national politics, labor unions to do with their mining and so on. And everyone mingled with everyone else, old school friends and so on. That system had been going on for hundreds of years, where people communicated thoughts, real feelings, real things that really mattered to them and their communities, to each other, conversation. When the TV came in, and I was still about this high, within about a month, I could go down that park every weekend and no one was there. It literally overnight killed off the socialization and interaction between people and tradition, again, where they exchanged viewpoints, gave each other news, helped each other out, who was sick, who was this, who was that. Everyone helped each other out. And from then on, you could pass rows and rows and rows of these old, and they were called row houses, all joined together. And all you saw at night was the flickering of that bluish light in the windows. And that was the end. That was the end of real communities. It happened within a matter of about a month. The flicker rate on the television is very, very important. It was timed to be so many cycles per second, and it actually just meets with the brain patterns for an alpha state. When our brain sees it through our eyes, we start to adopt that flicker rate in our mind, and we go into a deep alpha state. Watch children and watch their mouths. They drop open. They won't hear their parents talking. They're hypnotized, in fact. Why would they give that particular flicker rate when they could have chosen of a whole variety of flicker rates? It wasn't an essential thing to have. So it was done for a purpose. It was meant to be hypnotic. It was meant to be used as a tool of propaganda and indoctrination, even through the guise of entertainment and so on. It also was to create a new society because they were the avant-garde, as I say, leading the sexual revolution through drama, through little documentaries, fiction, non-fiction, all combined. Once again, back to Plato. The audience see what they see. You understand that it's even worked out towards different age groups. There's something on for everybody's age group. Each age group is actually being updated as well, even the elderly ones, into new ways of thinking or seeing things. But the target mainly was for youngsters. If we take one of the world's experts on propaganda, who is Jacques Ellul, who wrote extensively on how the mind works and how all entertainment, he said, that has to do with government programs such as police, detective stories, detective series, which contain little human dramas as the hook that you identify with to make you watch the whole story. Child gets kidnapped, detective goes on a hunt, he goes through hell and fire to get that child back. You identify with the hero if you're a male, you'll identify with the heroine if you're female. And that's the hook to get you to watch them. But what he said was all dramas to do with police or even the military in movies are pure propaganda. Pure propaganda. The human story is just the bait to make you watch through it, to get you to identify with it. Because once again, there's always a message left somewhere in the movie. It might even be a message that's against your own morality. It could be where the cop, for instance, does sleep with this beautiful woman while his wife was at home, and it's all part of the story, and even tell you why he did this. He was feeling down that day, blah, blah, blah. And so you've just again altered your viewpoints on how you yourself might behave in that situation. And that sometimes that kind of thing can be justified. That's how you're downloaded through entertainment. It's there to alter and direct and always upgrade into another step of the direction that the entire culture for someone else's purpose. Let's talk about the effects of the alpha state first of all. Recent articles I've even read on the air from various science studies show you that even when you switch off television, you remain in that alpha state for maybe 45 minutes to an hour, sometimes longer, depending on how long you've been watching it. With high definition, again, why would a president of a country mandate that all TVs had to go high definition? Is it because he really cares so much about your happiness? And he wants better quality for you? Or is there another reason for it? Well, I'm sure the effects of the old flicker rates and what it did will also be incorporated in high definition, but with even more added benefits for bringing you into a complete hypnotic state. How do you wake someone up who's addicted to television? You can't. Very, very simple. You can't get your daily brainwashing, where literally it's bypassing any consciousness in the person. You can't take that every day and still try to wake up and learn at the same time. I've known people who've gone through complete withdrawal from television and gone into depressions because their entire routine is broken. They also have time on their hands, which is a big aspect of control, remember too. If you can take time away from a person who can think for themselves, who might say, oh, I'll go and read a book, I'll go and study something, or if you can take that time away from them and have them mesmerized in front of a television set, then you'll keep them dumb, stupid, compliant, and going along with the system. I always advise to people, if you know someone who's watching TV, it's quite simple to find out where they are mentally, psychologically, in the understanding of things. You can ask them a few simple questions. If they give you standard television answers, forget it. Simple as that, forget it. If you see some spark of their own opinion coming in, there's maybe a chance you can do something with them. But you cannot get you see, television, it can be classified as a drug. Any addiction is still an addiction. Television is an addiction. People watch 4 or 5 hours per day. Top psychologists and even the United Nations have talked about the use of television for creating the new culture for children. How many people know that all government agencies or departments, all governments in the world, basically, have departments of culture which hire cartoonists and pay their expenses to do cartoons, always incorporating the latest political correct story to do with environment, waste, bad adults, and how they've destroyed the planet through their consuming, etc. How many people realize, as you plonk your children down in front of it to babysit them, that they're actually being brainwashed scientifically? And these cartoons were designed by experts to get their message across to those children, implanted in their young minds, fixed in their young minds forever, for the rest of their lives, ongoing daily, and even right down to the novels that you read to children that are designed for children too, which will incorporate all of this, all paid by government grants to authors and writers. You literally have to take it into your own hands. It's one of the most dangerous tools that can be used. It's also dangerous in this extent that why do you think government licenses TV stations? If you were an independent producer, TV station who came out with this kind of information, you would not get a license. You'd have to be authorized and politically correct with a whole bunch of things to do and not to do written out before you'd be given a license. And you'd be checked on every so often to make sure you were following those topics that you're allowed to. If you want to advise people on television, and you can do this with yourself, how to train yourself, how to watch television. If you never get involved, you understand a storyline, you watch a movie, but don't get involved in, as I say, there's always a thread or a hook for you to follow, a plot, whatever, the chase. The guy always ends up with the beautiful woman at the end after going through hell to rescue a child or whatever it happens to be, or save the world. If you can stop yourself from getting lost in the emotional part of it and study the movie as you're watching it, you'll learn the techniques that have been implanted in the movie itself. That's a great way to learn. If you can do it with yourself, you can also show other people how to do this, to actually study everything as it's been presented to you. And eventually what you'll find is that when you're watching even documentaries, you'll see how the documentaries themselves are shaped to give you the opinions, often very strong opinions, without giving you specific facts or giving you distorted facts, etc. Learn how to critically analyze and think as you're watching. And if you can show others this technique, a good example is sit down with someone who regularly watches a good movie, one that you've previously watched, and then point out all the politically correct little inserted words, slogans, phrases that have been put in there, and show them how it's been done. That way it can actually be fun to study television and write down all the different things that they've missed, but it's all implanted subconsciously in their mind, because those implants, those subconscious implants, will become their opinions, and they will never know how they arrived at them. They won't remember it's from this particular documentary, this particular movie, or whatever. So that can also be fun. That's a positive side of it. You can train anyone to do this. With the internet, the first person to mention it that I know of, at least to the public, was again this master, Brzezinski, in his book Between Two Ages. In the early 70s, he said, shortly a system will be given to the public of mass communication, which will cause a revolution, the revolutionary thing to change society. But he also mentioned and hinted at the fact that there would be regulation behind it. He mentioned too that those who brought it in would never lose control, the main control over the internet, because after all, knowledge is power. Knowledge has always been power. That's why all down through the ages, the real machinations of government are never told to the public. Real power comes from understanding and having all the facts on any particular topic. So therefore, the internet was to be given to the general public with other intentions. Initially, it was to get them all into it. Now, what did the elite want to achieve? What was their point of view? They wanted people to become so used to the internet they couldn't do without it. Now we see businesses really can't do without it. They can't imagine going back to pencil and paper and taking inventory and all this kind of stuff. For the youngsters, who must be the generation they target, they made sure that that's the only thing I knew about the internet from the media. I was completely ignorant about it, and computers. The only thing I knew was there was lots of pornography on it. Every paper kept telling you about it, which again is the same old technique they used in the 60s and 70s. Aren't we naughty? Wink, wink, for the rock stars on television. Knowing all the youngsters would get into it when their hormones are high. That's all they're thinking about. But once folk were addicted to it, they also planned to gradually alter it, keeping the people addicted to it as they changed it into another system where mainstream media, the authorized media, the culture creation industry media, would eventually have prime, or the main dibs, the first grabs at the main bandwidth that eventually they're claiming will have to be reduced. So in the meantime, there's never been a window of opportunity for the general public to use a medium to communicate to each other alternate news, verified facts to each other as we have at the moment. That eventually, supposedly, is going to be policed. They've had international meetings, the first one held in Canada, under the guise of the United Nations, or the auspices of the United Nations, to do with regulating and censorship of the internet. They have these meetings every year as they add more laws to it. We know the cloud system is to come in eventually. It's been all over the media in Britain, where you won't be able to store anything on a hard drive. You won't even need a hard drive eventually. Remote servers will have all your information for you. It will then be used as a form of punishment if you were politically incorrect in some form or another. Then you'll be cut off from accessing that server with all your data until you toe the line and behave yourself. Social control can be used through monetary penalizations, or through other penalizations like withdrawing you access from it. It definitely will be used for social control, again, unless it's a backlash from the general public. And they do expect backlashes from people who have become used to looking into whatever site they wish to look at, or communicating whatever kind of information they want to each other. Now, along with the introduction of the internet, we've got to remember too, the government agencies also set up and promoted chat rooms and all the rest of it. And there are agents within this strange nether region called the internet whose job it is to infiltrate people who are coming together as groups, communicating on specific topics to do with political changes, and disrupting those groups. So already it's a battlefield, and they called it the cyber wars long before they even gave this internet to the people. It'd been an informational war, they said in all the papers. Therefore, government intelligence agencies would have to expand their roles with mandates to also be in this invisible world where they would manipulate various groups from within as well. There's also a lot of nonsense, of course, on the internet too, which can take you down conspiracy paths. I hate the term conspiracy because the government wants us to use it like we're some sort of hobbyists and some sort of kooks. I don't use the term. But that's become the most popular type of site now, is conspiracy site. And there's many out there. There's professional agents out there as well who've been funded by governments and even launched by governments to be well known, especially in Europe, to lead the conspiracy sites. Then they bring in the UFOs, the aliens, until you have achieved your goal. Counterintelligence. Let's talk about counterintelligence and how it works. What is intelligence? Intelligence gathering is sending agents out to simply listen. To listen in marketplaces, bars, cafes, as to what the people are discussing. Lawrence of Arabia, in his own book, 7 Pillars of Wisdom, was trained as an agent. He was trained in Arabic languages. He was given lots of money, he and 11 other people, trained from Cambridge, and sent over to the Arabic countries to start up Arabic newspapers. Once they started putting stories in the newspapers, they went round the marketplaces, they hired lots of guys to listen to gossip, to see if the intelligence they were putting out in the papers was being discussed by the recipients, the readers. That's basic intelligence gathering. What is counterintelligence? Counterintelligence, from a government's perspective, is taking information and data that could be crucially, it could be bad for the ruling regime, and finding ways to counter that knowledge, counter it. What you do, standard-wise, if you can't defame the person who's bringing out a truth or kill them, is to bring out your own heroes. Launch them well, finance them well into the same area. Saying the same stuff that others are talking about is called intelligence. Giving out facts. And once they have the following, then they start bringing in aliens and UFOs. And they bring in the New Age, the whole New Age religion into it. Spirituality is the big term they're using today. Until a newcomer, a skeptic, will hear this stuff from the paid agent, who's very good, who says gives the same data as the person who doesn't go into the UFOs and so on. But the guy who doesn't go into the UFOs, aliens, reptilians, and all the rest of it, suddenly is thrown out with the other guy. You're classified with them by association. Your topics are associated. Even though you stay clear of the fantasy stuff, the disinformation, you'll be lumped along with them. And then you've countered the intelligence. When you mention the facts, people laugh at you, say, oh, you probably believe that the aliens are running the world now, and that's it. That's counterintelligence. And that is also all over the internet. And it's paid for by, again, government psyops operations. Some groups that I've found are doing really good work, where people decide to get together physically, and they will choose a book to read to do with the factual data that's available to the public that can be proven. Oh, Henry Kissinger. And they'll go through it. They'll analyze the book. They'll analyze the phrases. They'll analyze the contents. They start to participate in what they're reading because others will remember this particular era, this time when this event happened, can add to the thing and so on. That's participation, that's communication, and other information, as I say, from those involved who live through things can be added to the whole thing, giving you a much more complete picture. So it's a good idea to to start this kind of thing off in your local area, even if there's only two of you that started off. Don't sit and laugh. It's kind of comical at first when you say, oh, we're going to discuss this book. You've never done anything like this in your lifetime. Sit down and get yourself a coffee or a beer or whatever you need and take turns at reading. And ask the other guy, do you have anything to add to what I've just read? Do you have any insights into it? What do you think of this? It gets you stimulated into participating and really thinking, because everybody who's alive today has been trained literally not to have to think. As Brzezinski said, shortly the public will be unable to reason or think for themselves. They'll expect the media to do the reasoning for them. So let's counter that. Let's get back to thinking for ourselves, using the data, the material, get involved, start using our minds again. And you'll be surprised, it's like a muscle you haven't used for a long time, how quickly you start to use it, how sharp you become so quickly. And if you can get larger groups and larger groups together doing the same thing, and then you can branch them together, communicate together, then they suggest other books that you haven't heard of. Maybe you need a particular book for evidence. I have stacks of them at home. Everyone has access somewhere to some material that got stuck away. And when you can start putting all of this material together, mainly through, as I say, discussion and reading groups, you can add to the knowledge. The more knowledge and facts, actual factual data you can put together, the bigger your arsenal is. And the easier it becomes to show people and convince them, look, this is authenticated stuff. Here's the factual data, here's the physical book. Read from that book and then have your discussions. What do you think about this? What do you think they meant by this? What do you think has happened? Have they fulfilled this part of an agenda? And most people will say, yeah, they have. Well, here's how they did it. The evidence is all there, but knowledge, remember, is scattered. That's also why, since the 70s and so on, televisions were put up in places where people used to communicate to each other, bars and restaurants, the pubs of Europe. Everyone talked and discussed everything. The televisions were all put in for a reason. And now everyone's mesmerized and you can hear sports or loud music. You can't communicate anymore. That was government promoted because the government licensed the big chains of taverns and pubs all throughout Europe. And so what you've got really is deliberate attempts. Nothing happens for no reason. Why? The customers weren't demanded. They were bored in bars as they discussed topics. People would just move around the pub talking and listening to the conversations, and they'd join in the one that you liked. Why was it so important to destroy communication? It's because it's a main propaganda tool. It stops communication between people, even in a room. Have you noticed too, they don't even discuss the topics, once the news is read to them, to each other. They've both been downloaded with the opinions. You don't have to ask what their opinion is. It's going to be the same one as you've been downloaded with, left by the expert. So we've got to get back to communications and communicating with each other and finding the evidence. Knowledge is scattered. Knowledge is power, so it's scattered all over the place and thousands of books. But when you can start these reading classes up and get other reading classes communicating with you, even through the internet, you can start putting the data, the factual data together, and so that you can present it to the public and bring in more and more members. Only knowledge and the will to use this knowledge is going to thwart the plans that have openly been made for us and declared from the elites at the top. The whole problem of being involved in a community, it can be a double-edged sword. We know, for instance, that commutarianism is a term used first by Bush Sr., talking about the collectivist society coming in. The United Nations has us all split up into communities. It's promoted through local TV. Even Sudbury here has your community. This is your local community. Be involved in your community. They're talking about a politically correct community. That's the problem. Government really penetrated and altered and distorted and changed society through communities. not just with television, which has certainly destroyed the community spirit. The intent of governments, this is how abusers work too. Abusers work with the same technique because they want power over a victim. The abuser will come in and take care initially of problems of the abused. Often the problems are the very outcome of what the abusers have been doing to the victims in the first place. Governments came in with welfare, for instance, a long time ago, in all countries about the same time. At one time, families helped each other out. You didn't need welfare. If someone lost their job, everyone chipped in. You didn't condemn the family member for being unemployed or ill or whatever, or losing their job. Families helped each other. Now, the family, remember, is still really the smallest nucleus of a tribe. And then government came in with unemployment insurance, which they took off you, but nothing was for free. And gradually over time, when people became unemployed or even sick for a while and couldn't work, I heard people even say to their own relatives, well, go to welfare, that's what they're for. There are social agencies to deal with this. Until today, we're in a sad state where even close relatives won't help each other out. They expect the government, the abuser, the government is the abuser. They expect the government to take care of all financial problems for the unfortunate victims. And they stop helping each other out. We've got to start reclaiming the rights to, and you can do it personally with people you know, to help other people out and start countering the government's mandate. Because the government's mandate is for control over the victims, not to help the victims. Those who fall under that particular level into the welfare state have their lives run by government agencies and social workers. That's what Huxley says. He says that they won't need their survival capabilities. Russell said the same thing, because the government is taking care and making all their decisions for them. In order to help you, it's really to take you over and have you obeying them and their system. That's what you're up against, a planned war strategy, making them dependent upon government services, not their family units, not their brothers and sisters, their fathers or mothers, but on the state itself. We've got to counter that and become involved again in the lives of those around us and have our own true communities. It doesn't matter if there's only 5 of you in a community, even if you live in a town or a city, that's your own little community where you all have something in common. What it really is gaining knowledge for your own and others' self-preservation and survival into the future.
No lizards, no aliens, no nonsense. This is Reality Bytes.
Control
Welcome to Reality Bytes Radio on the 30th of September. How time flies when you're enjoying yourself, eh? And delighted to have Alan Watt back on the line again for some more of his insights into what's going on. Can you hear me okay, Alan?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, great. Where do we start? I suppose...
Question.
Yeah, well, there's... I don't know if you saw it. There was a Dr. Yedin, who was a former chief scientific officer at Pfizer for 16 years.
That's right.
Yeah, and he's so you have seen it, yeah. But he's going on about the cases and why there's no threat of a second wave and why it's basically all based on bogus data. And there seemed to be some pushback even in Australia on Sky News.
Yes.
There was a presenter there spoke to somebody in Sweden talking about this and saying that we should look at Europe, and they keep saying these cases are going up and up and up and up, but the fatalities are just basically flatlined since June, and there's nothing actually happening. And it almost reminded me of Michael Mann's hockey stick, you know, kind of all these case numbers going up and up and up, and absolutely nothing happened to the temperature.
Yeah,
but
I mean, the more testing you do with the faulty tests anyway, you're guaranteed to put the numbers up, but there's nobody ill with it.
yeah. Well, this guy's actually saying that I know we've mentioned before that's about 50% at least false positives. This guy's saying that actually all of them could be false positives.
90-odd%, yeah.
Yeah. So and a 99.8% survival rate, even if you're infected.
That test, remember, Neil, the inventor of it said it's useless for diagnosis. It's for laboratory purposes only. It's not for diagnosing patients. So even the inventor said this, you know.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if some people in the media are starting to realise that this is a lot worse even for them than they thought. They've been spouting the lies for 6 or 7 months, and they're starting to see what's happening, particularly in Australia. As I say, that guy was on Sky News in Australia, one of their news anchors or whatever he is. But he must be seeing what's happening in Australia and thinking, do I really want this for my children? You've got to wonder. But my niece was in Australia until recently. Thankfully, she got out about 3 or 4 weeks ago. She was there for a year. And they've asked her to go back. And I've tried to say to my brother, no, don't do that. Don't let her go. But yeah, in Australia, I don't know if you've seen this one. It's getting even worse. They're talking about now being able to basically do as they like with you, force you against the wall or down on the ground, and take your clothes off.
Yeah.
So in terms of Australia, okay, it was it started off as a penal colony for Western nations, if you like. It seems to be going back there.
Yeah. But sure, I mean, it's always had it just below the boil there. You know, it's in peacetime. There's a kind of restrained civility with the police on the people. But it's you see, they've given the order now for the voice of authority, they call it, the United Nations, and some of the top politicians are saying, they're repeating it. There's time now just to literally use extreme authority over the public now, and so the police are the first to react and to put it into play. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, Australia always had this reputation of having all these macho men. You know, you watch the Australian rules football, and they were all wrestling each other, and the Australian rugby team was this big tough outfit and all that.
A guy in Australia, Neil, a guy in Australia sent me some stuff recently. And the city he's in, he said that he can see that the local Keep Fit gym, you know, where they do all their kind of 20-minute workouts kind of stuff. And the guys now are wearing leotards like the girls, and I think the old Crocodile Dundee is pretty well gone, you know.
I always think about those gymnasiums. They're generally big glass windows, and everybody can see in. And as you say, they're sitting there in leotards and things like that. Yeah. Just like the people that go out for a cycle these days. Men are wearing latex pants and all this kind of stuff. Yep. And I thought back to my childhood. You think we were going about on these chopper bikes and falling off them, skinning our knees, banging our heads, and all sorts of things. And these guys nowadays seem to be just want to wrap themselves up in cotton wool, and they're so vain.
It isn't just happened by itself. People don't realize that everything that the system they live in is pretty well manufactured for them, and I mean in minute detail. And the whole unisex idea was literally to eliminate the obvious distinctions between men and women. That was part of it. But it's bigger than that, because it's also, and this is stuff that's been mandated by the culture creators for years. There's high-level courses on how to do it and implement it in countries and nations, and we know some of the culprits that fund lots of it. But so yeah, you get this sort of unisex idea where men and women are the same, basically. There's also sustainability is interwoven with all of it, completely all of it. And sustainability is a buzzword for depopulation. Same with climate change, you see. Same with COVID. It's for depopulation purposes, and the World Economic Forum and the sustainability programs is all completely interwoven. But the fashion design is to get people into the look. The look now is thin, you see. For a post-industrial, post-consumerist type society, where goody people are complete vegans eventually. I mean, that's pushed from the very top of the United Nations, veganism, you know. It was pushed years ago when I did the talks on the big 5 agribusinesses and the chemical industries that they own for the pesticides and the herbicides, pushing complete veganism. And again, you get overdosing of the kind of zyto and phenol estrogens affecting men as well. But the thing is, they're all looking so thin, and this is the good, approved look. You see, it's approved. If you look at the rioters in the streets, the protesters in the States, they're just like this cold weather, so they burn houses to get heat. But if you just look at them, they've got you swear they had their pants painted on them, the black pants. Remember years ago, back in the 80s, they had the kind of spandex type for the girls. You could see everything in them. It's very, very similar, you know. And you're watching all this come to the fore now. You're good, you're approved, you're one of the crowd because you're so thin, and you're probably vegan, or at least you'll tell your friends you are. And that's all approved. That's the new approved format for the young. And anybody who's older with baggy pants or older, or you're bad because you probably eat too much, and you maybe even eat meat. I'm not kidding you. This is. I've seen some of the programs from the very, very top pushing this whole agenda here. You know?
Yeah,
People copy it, and they have no idea that what they're copying is all designed for them. Their language, the phrases they use, the new buzzwords, neologisms, you know. And their fashions are completely designed for them.
Yeah, I remember back when I was at university, I was doing this. It was called Hotel Services Management, but it covered hospitality in whatever kind of context, whether it was prisons, cruise ships, or whatever. And we had to do a stand-up talk for 15 minutes on nutrition and diet and all this kind of thing. And I was working, paying my mortgage at the time, so I was doing 60 hours a week working, and I was just fitting in university when I could. And all the books in the library were obviously out by the time I got there. So I just grabbed what I could and did this presentation on how people's bodies had changed, the shape of the bodies, what was acceptable, what was seen as attractive, 100 years before or 50 years before, and went down that road and kind of went through how the diet had changed and stuff, and how people were now kind of going back to being fat because all the processed foods and things like that. This was before I knew anything, so I obviously noticed something in that. But I showed pictures of naked bodies and that, which freaked out the tutors at the time, although it probably wouldn't now. But the skinny look, and I see articles all over the place now for veganism. Oh, I had a triple heart bypass until I became vegan, and now I'm okay. Kind of thing. Well, she's okay because she had the triple bypass, not because she's a vegan. But it's maybe getting people used to being skinny so they won't notice when they're starving.
It's more than just that. That's a big part of it. It's like everything else in the present globalist revolution. This is the elite's revolution. It's not the people on the street. They're just the useful idiots, you know. But the globalists have been after this. They already ruled the old system. They're moving their system into the next part of their system. And this is what the chaos all is to train the rest of us to go along with it. And that's why the COVID is being used too, for sustainability, et cetera, et cetera. The function mainly for the U.S. is almost over. I gave these talks many years ago that the U.S. was the battering ram that took over from Britain to force a kind of system across the world. And all the things you're talking about now, even with your fashion and various other things with Jen, are all pushed through the World Bank, based in the U.S., remember, and IMF, et cetera. And they won't give you loans across the world unless you accept all the so-called progressive policies. And that's why they tie in completely with the Marxist philosophies and the tenets of the manifesto, because the destruction of marriage is at the top. That's what Carl Quigley talked about. He says, we, meaning the elite group that he belonged to, he said, we are often mistaken for communists. He says, because much of our agenda is in parallel with the same goals. And he's talking about the Sea of Fire and the Royal Institute for International Affairs. So it's the same thing. If you destroy marriage and then you promote all other kinds of sexual activity, and in fact, you can actually boost or put the depletion of offspring by pushing, dealing with the problems of hypersexual activity, which is abortion, you see. Until it's normal now, it's just getting rid of a wart, they say to the woman, to have an abortion. So they've achieved a lot of goals: depopulation, no bonding, because folk don't stay together long enough to bond. That was also part of their manifesto when you look at it in depth, you know. And so they've achieved most of the goals, and yet people always thought it was just this Marxist, communist idea. It's much bigger than just Marxism. You know.
Yeah.
We're living through a planned society. So the U.S. was the battering ram from World War I onwards, really, since it took over the financial system. And the taxpayers of the U.S. have been funding it ever since, you know.
Yeah. It's no coincidence that there's a remake of Brave New World. Just came out there a couple of months ago. I haven't seen it, but it's a TV series of it. And I'm sure it'll be full of sex and drugs and rock and roll, and everybody will be happy. But I was just wondering if some of these Australian cyclists are going down the road with a spandex on, how the authorities are going to get them off them, because they'll need to get a tin opener or something.
Well, one thing about them, if it comes down to smuggling food, eventually, during all our present ongoing eventual curfews, there's this winter upcoming curfews and so on. And you'll get they'll go door to door to see if you've been hoarding food. By the way, that's also on emergency plans if you ever looked at them.
Well, I remember you talking years ago about the smart fridges, and you got all the barcodes on the tins and stuff, and your smart fridge will be telling the authorities.
Your smart meter too.
Yeah.
And so literally, and all the different gadgets in your home interact as well. So they know exactly what you bought and if you're buying too much, etc. And most of the stuff you buy, even cans, all got little barcodes on it. So they got all that data. And most folk today, anyway, use their credit cards. So they get their point system, so that the stores they buy from have got a complete list of everything. That's part of the deal. When you say, "Oh, I'll get a discount because I'm a good consumer at this particular store," they give me a card. Oh, yeah, but you've also signed away your right to privacy as to what you bought, and they can give that to the government and so on, which they do.
And insurance companies, of course, I think I've heard you mention that before, to basically deny you insurance because you eat too many French fries or you eat too much meat, for example. Exactly. And your health insurance.
But with leotards, you won't have any problems in Australia because any little bulge will show. So I don't know if you went and stashed a Mars bar or something, you know.
Is that a Mars bar in your pocket? Like, just pleased to see me. Yes, I mean, it's Australia. I mean, how far do you think they've gone pretty far already? I've seen I don't know. I know you have trouble seeing videos and things, but I don't know if you saw the one of them going through the open air food market. There must have been, I don't know, 100 of these stormtrooper police officer types with the shields and the batons. Their whole face is covered. You wouldn't be able to recognise them. You know, you don't know who's beating you over the head.
Seeing, and this was the reason for it. See, nothing in your life happens just by chance. You know, when it comes to culture, and culture changes the creation of entertainment. And remember the old Star Wars, you know? And you saw those particular mechanical. Well, all the troops they all looked the same, black or white outfits they had on, like a chessboard idea. Here's the good ones, here's the bad ones. But really, they're all the same. They're kind of faceless creatures. You saw the same thing, and what was the one that to do with the Duval was in the futuristic one as well, where they live underground and work in THX. Is it THX one, the movie? You see it there too.
Okay, we're back on air. Gremlins kicked in again. And I think, Alan, you were talking about the movie THX, was it 1138, I think it is?
I think it was, yeah.
With Robert Duvall. Yeah, they lived on the ground. And these police officers were, I think they were actual robots, weren't they? And they were.
Yes, they were. And then, as I say, with the Star Wars, you saw those the so-called white-clad good guys fighting the black-clad. They're both the same. The troops, you know, they're like robots, and you weren't sure if they were human or not. And now you're seeing the same thing with the troops or policemen with their body armor. They look much the same as a Star Wars idea. You've been trained already. They're otherworldly, you see. They're alien to an extent, which makes them more fearsome and terrifies the public. It's intentional. It's designed that way.
Yeah. Did you hear what happened in Trafalgar Square at the weekend?
Not much.
Yeah. Well, what had happened was they had the usual crowd there, quite a large number, peacefully protesting and getting along fine with the ordinary policeman with the usual peaked helmet on. Until later, when these stormtrooper type riot policemen came down both sides of them and just charged into the crowd and started beating them. Obviously, an orchestrated thing, and you've got to wonder what ordinary policemen standing around looking at that are thinking. Yes. What's going through their minds? Do you think they're just, oh well, that's nothing to do with us. We've done our part. We've been peaceful and quiet, and we haven't beat anybody up, so we're okay. These guys can deal with that later. But ordinary police officers are obviously in the firing line, and quite literally in places like Portland in America, and other places where they're getting defunded. I think some of them in New York actually resigned because they were getting defunded. And
a lot of them did. Yeah, a lot of them actually retired, took out of retirement.
Yeah. But
why go to work when you get no backup to do your job from the government, or local government, or federal government? So why would you go and get murdered?
Yeah. Well, I mean, they put their lives on the line anyway in a lot of these cases. But when they're not going to get backup from anybody, I think, and even if they do get backup, then they're still probably facing some kind of court prosecution for doing their jobs. But I was speaking to somebody in the little bar that we go to once or twice a week, and he was talking about this the Black Lives Matter and stuff and blah blah blah. And I said to him, I says, if black people think that they're getting some kind of privilege over white people, I says, there's going to be some kind of race war going on, and it's not going to end well for them. And he said, no. This is a lot of rednecks down here. They're just are hoping that happens because they just want to take them out.
Yes.
And that's not a pleasant prospect to.
But this is an old idea. The Communist Party, they tried it in the States before, going way back actually, when they tried they trained Garvey as a communist. He was a black leader, and eventually he turned on the trainers because he realized that they were using the black folk to try to get revolution started, and he was really screwed by them because they defunded him and they destroyed his income and even his big plans for a shipping company that he was getting involved in at the time. So, but they were quite open about trying to get a racial war. It was the easiest chink in the armor, looking at America back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and they actually talked about it in great detail how you start a racial war, how to get anybody who had less than anybody else, and then train them, the leaders, and then agitate, and eventually have riots and an overthrow, but it failed at the time.
Because it's the whole Black Lives Matter thing, where you're watching these people out in the streets in the early days, trashing all these businesses and burning them down. It reminded me a bit of the Saul Alinsky techniques of.
It's the same thing. You see that guy Mann is back out, MANN, one of the guys who's involved in that. He's up there on I think YouTube giving talks about interviews on television about how he and his people sympathize. This is the same as used to use before. Sympathize with the black, and so they were funding the black for pushing for revolution. So it's it's the same crew actually.
Yeah, I mean, one of his famous experiments, as it were, was to feed a load of black people beans, I think it was, and send them into the theatre to let the white folks suffer the consequence of them eating beans, and all it did was reflect even worse on the black people, and made people think of them exactly as they wanted them to think of them, and I think.
And if you look at the BLM anyway, I mean, look at the leaders of them. I mean, I'm not talking about the one
that we can't talk about.
Well, the ones that came out as the Marxist leaders, you look at the ones who are doing the riots, and it's not black folk, they're kind of white.
Yeah.
And some of them are descended from the revolutionaries, the great-grandkids of some of them from the 1920s, you know.
Yeah, and they're not pure.
Actually.
Yeah. And they're not pure.
A lot more, but it's not really that wise these days. But some of them are talking in certain lingos in the streets. I've got friends who are talking back to them in the same lingos. It's quite interesting to see what's going on. But you're looking at the same old kind of thing getting used for the final revolution.
Yeah. And,
you have to remember too. You see, the U.S. literally took over from the old communist revolutionary thing, and so as Russia supposedly went down, and Gorbachev gave his speech that don't believe that communism is dead. He says we're now spreading out to the west, a different technique. It ties in again with the Morris Dees, the Dees report, the investigation into the foundations were funding revolutionary movements back in the 40s and 50s. You know, same organizations that are funding them, and it came out back then of who was behind it, why they were doing it, and so on. And they said that the Ford Foundation gave a talk that's on record, and you can hear the D's talking about it. Another one's talking about it. They talked to the CEO of the Ford Foundation, who said to them, "Our goal is to seamlessly join America by changing its culture to that of the Soviet system incrementally until they can eventually join the two together into a new type of system.
Yeah.
Not quite capitalist, not quite communist, and that's the technique."
Yeah, and I think it was Bezmenov was it that came over and said, "Wow, we've been very successful."
Oh yeah,
and,
yeah. He actually said something awfully true as well, because he worked in Canada for a while in the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. That's their version in Canada, the BBC. It's tax funded, and the CBC, we call it the Communist Broadcasting Corporation, because if you want to get progressive, cutting edge, you tune in there and you will have nightmares. But he worked with the CBC, Bezmenov, and he said he met more real communists in the CBC than he met in the Soviet Union.
Yeah, you had an article on your website this week from the Daily Mail. I think it was back in 2018, and I can't bring it up on here because it starts interfering with the call, but. I was looking at it earlier about it's from was it from the Guardian? The Guardian maybe, and they were saying that the government had banned English schools from teaching anything to do with anti-capitalism. And I thought that's a bit strange coming from the Guardian, and then you read into it, and basically it's just a move towards teaching them anything of history.
Yes, sure.
To twist the whole narrative to, well, I guess it's back to year zero. I don't know.
Yes,
is that
yes,
where they're going to go?
That's absolutely, yeah. That's the whole part of the. You've been living through this revolution your whole life. You didn't know it, because as I say, it's mainly big cultural changes. That's how you do it. The Gramsci type technique, you know. Gramsci gave the idea out so that rather than hit countries head on, and you'd probably lose if they were bigger and more financially secured, and just get in and start changing their culture. It might take you 100 years. Well, that's a technique that's been used very successfully. And when you look, see, everybody's been asleep watching these 30 years wars across the Middle East and Asia, all funded by Britain and the States.
Yeah.
And the people in Britain and the States are generally ignorant of what's been happening. They see these things as kind of remote things that have nothing to do with them, even though they're funding it and they're sending troops to these things. And they never ask why, which is really interesting in itself. The people have been trained never to really go into any depth of to find out the whys of anything, especially wars, like continuous wars, like Gulf War I. That literally morphed right into the Bush 9/11 straight, Operation Iraqi Freedom, as they put them into the Stone Age. But it was all planned, including the mass migration out of those nations. And the kicker eventually was the bulwark that held it back, or the mass migration back from hitting Europe, and that was Gaddafi in Libya. And that day that they gave this interesting Masonic thing that they gave France the right to have to drop the first bombs. That's what they said in the papers. They gave them the right to drop the first bombs on Libya. It was so symbolic in a much higher level. But Gaddafi said it before it all happened. He says, if you take us out here in Libya, it says that you get millions of folk every year flooding into Europe and Britain. Well, that was the intention of it.
Yeah. You would think that Gaddafi, for all his faults, etc., would be the darling of The Guardian, because he was greening the Sahara and showing how you could make fields out of desert.
The Guardian is like the rest of them. I mean, whatever I gave the talk years ago. I said, whatever you're into, they've got a ready-made either newspaper or system or club for you to join. They're all ready-made suits, And it's just like religions too. There's so many different varieties and shades of religion. However you think you might want to fancy or shop, you could do for shopping for religion or shopping for politics. They've got it already made for you. And the internet is full of that too now. That you've got all your stars out there. They come out of nowhere. They're well funded by the governments. And
well, we just had a disgusting example of that in Ireland with these clowns called Jedward. These twins, and talk about nauseating. Wear your mask, do this, take the vaccine, and just pathetic. But I lost my train of thought then.
But I might say too, it was Rees, I think, Rees, not D's, but Rees.
The Rees Commission.
Yeah, and that's so important to go through that, because here's a man that was sent out by the Congress to investigate it all, who literally, even when he gave the interviews years later, he was still in shock to find out that everything he believed in and the reality, the kind of fake persona of the country, the nation state, it was completely different than how he'd been raised and how his parents probably had believed too. And he was still in shock from finding out that there's a vastly different system running the show.
Yeah, I was going to get back onto that Guardian article. They said that they want to teach anything anti-capitalist. It made me wonder what they were permitted to teach them, because it doesn't say in there they're not to teach them the WHO's sex education program, grooming them all for paedophilia. It doesn't mention that.
No.
But so that's obviously permitted.
It's sustainability, you see. As long as they don't have bear children,
yeah,
they can do whatever they want. So that's the whole idea. It's also amazing when you go into some of the organizations that have been around for years that helped with other organizations networking together, given governmental authority, by the way, to change the cultures. And the Frankfurt School was one of them, And you find that Theo Adorno talked about destroying the West right down to the very essence of everything that folk believed in, including, he said, right down to necrophilia. He says, we won't even stop there with changing the culture.
Yeah.
I mean, everything that you thought was nice, good, and sacred and decent had to be utterly not just destroyed, but buried,
Yeah, I mean, if you go beyond necrophilia, where does that take you?
Well, Well, you
Who
know,
knows?
when you when you see the fare that they've been pushed for entertainment recently, I mean, for years now, actually, getting worse and worse. The people literally are debauched already. When they see blood in the streets and folk getting tortured and slaughtered in the streets, but tortured before they get killed, they're already psychically prepared for it.
Yeah. Well,
They might even enjoy it, some of them.
yeah. Well, it's sticking with that. I don't know if you saw the clip of the girl being tasered at the. She was watching I think it was a college football match or something.
That's right.
With her mother beside her. And somebody's filming it from the stand. Again, getting back to these macho men, you know, they're standing there filming this huge guy, this huge, I think it was just a security officer, but he had a taser. He wasn't a police officer. And literally wrestling with this young girl. And the mother standing there allowing it to happen. I thought, why isn't she? I thought she was maybe not related at the time until I found out later that she was a mother. I thought, why is she letting this guy do this? You know, and then there's people standing around filming it. And I'll just sit and watching the game as if nothing's going on, and it's beyond belief.
Here's something that folks should understand. I've said it so many times that we are the most studied species on the planet. It's not the ants or mice or rats and mazes, you know. It's people. And I've looked for many, many years at consistent repetitive studies on human behavior. When you see repetitive studies, and you'll see little things coming out every year by different organizations or MIT or somewhere, or the American Psychological Departments, they're all getting funded to put out these studies, constant studies. And I remember maybe 10, 15 years ago noticing the studies about questionnaires they were putting out, you know, on sex. And they had all kinds of questions and the age groups from up to, it was about 10 years old to 15, 15 to 25, 25 to 45 and so on, about do you mind gay sex, you know, and so on. How about gay marriage? Before it was all legalized and so on. I'm talking about marriage itself. But it's quite fascinating to see the old, and it's not that old, it's about 20 years ago, how many folk literally were against this or against that, whatever, or they weren't comfortable with, that's how they phrase it, you know. But every year they put out new studies, or every few years, to see if more folk had gone. And sure enough, and they actually admitted in the studies, it was because of the early education and the updating of the same education in the school system, that now the youngsters were way ahead of older people. And older were about 20 years old, right? But way ahead of the folk at 20 for saying it was quite acceptable. So that everybody's been trained incrementally into a whole variety of things sexually. And then when you see the fare they've been given from was it 40 Shades of Grey or whatever? I've never watched these things. I don't have a TV.
Shady Grey.
Shady Grey. Yeah. And which is S&M, I think, isn't it?
I believe so.
S&M for entertainment, yeah. And then you've got grandmothers and everything watching it and buying the disc or the series, you know, from the stations.
S&M, I guess, is small-minded. I don't know.
Small, oh, yeah, definitely small. But yeah, it's fascinating to see the studies as they're giving you the new stuff and then getting your feedback from people who are unwitting fools for filling in all these questions, because they don't even get themselves where it's all going to, where it's supposed to go to.
Yeah. Paul was.
So yeah, I mean, you're watching the Adorno idea being fulfilled, and folk can't even put it together.
Yeah,
well, it's just entertainment. Well, what do you think he was talking about?
Yeah. Well, Paula was telling me that maybe a month or so before this whole COVID nonsense started, there was somebody running for election here who was totally against homeschooling, totally against it, wanted to ban it. And a couple of months before that, she went full circle. And then here we are. We've got people getting taught at home on the computer in their bedrooms privately, where the parents not allowed to view what they're getting taught. That's right. There was a report came out, I think it was actually Florida, I can't remember, but they were getting very concerned that people had decided, well, we'll just keep our children at home, thanks very much. they're pushing now to get them back in the schools.
Sure.
I mean, is it because possibly their parents are actually teaching them real things?
Well, you probably saw the one with one of the teachers, who's also a social activist. He was the one who was named in the paper for being concerned that the children, that the parents might snoop on what the children are learning, because he was all for promoting all this stuff we've just been talking about.
That was in Tennessee, I think,
Yeah.
and the lady had to sign a waiver to say she wouldn't be in the room.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
So yeah, some of the leaders of the avant-garde of you can call it what you want. The Communist Party is one way of doing it, and as I say,
I mean,
again, that Rees Commission and the Norman Dodd that gave the interview. In fact, they went through some of this too. If you really go in depth in their books that they came out of that actual inquiry. So this is an old idea, and the Communist Party, if you want to call it communism is a front, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
We can't go much deeper into that, but it's a front. And the people that they use are always used, for to get it all into play. But they're not going to be the winners themselves. The people who do all the stuff at the bottom. In fact, they get rounded up afterwards because the system that used them can't allow them to continue that way. When the people find out they're not getting what they actually fought for,
yeah,
they get eradicated. And
I guess it's.
But anyway,
I guess it's the same. I guess it's the same
cultural
technique.
deprivation, step by step is a big part of the total destruction. Going way back to Gramsci, and it's been awfully successful until literally people. There's no shame at all or blushing at voyeurism, which is what television is, voyeurism into deep sexual affairs, and it's so addictive, which they know too, so incredibly addictive. That's part of it as well, and that's why they push it so much. Once they're addicted to that, no one's going to have a stable relationship, male or female.
Yeah, I remember
because when you see things there that don't really happen in natural life.
Yeah, I remember.
It's addictive, and you want a bigger high, and so you end up with mass promiscuity. You actually see it in the Matrix movie, by the way. They showed you a lot in the Matrix movies where they go into Zion underground, deep underground, and you have this strange kind of orgy scene when they're all dancing and going crazy and so on. That's the system of the future is showing you there.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, I remember being as a young boy. You'd be sitting with your parents watching the television. If something came on, even if it was just somebody kissing or something. You hear me? Hello. Hello. Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, I've been trying to talk for a while. It's just I don't know what's going on today. But
Where did we get cut off there? Do you know?
No, I heard you perfectly well. You were coming through all the time, but I thought you'd stopped, and then I tried to talk, and you obviously hadn't heard me, so you just carried on. Anyway, you can hear me now. But I was going to say, I remember being a young boy, and there was 4 children. You'd be sitting in front of the TV with your mum and dad. They'd be watching something. It could have been that ridiculous soap opera, Coronation Street, or whatever it was. And they'd be watching that, and if somebody so much as kissed each other, they'd be saying, "Oh, you don't be watching that. You don't be watching that."
Yeah.
And now, as you say, people don't even blush if they see basically what's pornography portrayed as entertainment in a movie or something, and sit there with the parents and watch it, and it's baffling, really. But going back to what you were saying about the so-called the street revolutionaries, as you were being rounded up and dealt with because they can turn on the new system, as it were. Do you think is it the same technique used on the military when they come back, or the same process? They dehumanize them and they pull a few up for war crimes or whatever, and just give them a bad name.
Oh yeah, they certainly do. Plus the military itself. Years ago, that article was out there, and they called it the chemical soldier. It also had, about advancements in the soldier and how he'd be on super drugs and for to be a super soldier. Well, they actually put him on lots of these drugs, and they're never the same afterwards. It would take them years to get the stuff out of their system. It causes permanent damage in a lot of them. they've got soldiers today in America that have done so many tours, duty, that that's all they know, a lot of them. You can't go on like that as a human being. Getting sent to hotspots, watching the misery. It doesn't matter about IQ levels or anything. You see the misery. If you go into Iraq and you see that it's still bombed into the Stone Age pretty well, a lot of places, and you see the misery caused by previous generations of your troops went in there, you couldn't possibly start saying, what on earth are we doing here? What have we done here? And of course, if you start thinking that way, you're going to find out if you really have the ability to go beyond your conditioning, because soldiers are incredibly conditioned, and they're trained not to think and not to feel. That's what a soldier really is. It's just to obey. Even to survive, you've got to live on your instincts, basically, fast and Pavlovian type responses. But if they start thinking, even in a few days off duty, or they home and leave or whatever, that's when things crash in on them, and they say, what on earth are we doing? What's really behind this? What's it really for? And if they start to get on that road there, that they're there for a different reason altogether, maybe even for a different nation or a different purpose or something else, because Americans aren't benefiting from any of this at all, as you know.
No.
That's the big problem right now. And we are left with the bill. And as you pay for it all, there's less money to spend at home on all the things that should be spent on in a post-productive world, your post-industrial society you're living in.
Yeah, I remember
all that money that's extra for taxes is going for the military-industrial complex, and to pay for all these bases across the planet.
Yeah.
It's not meant to go on forever. And back in the 1930s, as I mentioned before, when you look at the amazing books churned out by the Council on Foreign Relations and the Royal Institute for International Affairs, when they had their annual meetings, international meetings, and they've got a group for the Far East, including Australia, and some of them they held in Australia. I've got the books here. And they go through it step by step. Before World War II happened, 1937, I think it was 38, they said that the coming war with Japan, well, there was no war with Japan at that time, and the coming war with Germany, the war hadn't started. But they didn't even pause to even consider in the book. And all the members were there giving their speeches. That's what the book is comprised of, the speeches of different politicians, that their central bankers were there, Everybody who was anybody was there. And they're all listed in the back of the book. But there was no hesitation of even losing the war, which is quite fascinating, and what they would do afterwards in reconstructing the world. But right up until America, they went along the same lines as previous philosophers and historians in Britain, like Arnold Toynbee had gone on. It's America will be the battering ram for this new order, this world order, and the taxpayers will fund it, massive tax base. But they also said that America will be the ruler for a while of an empire, and then eventually it will start to lose, and I think that's like Vietnam, when the big change happened, the psychic change, that it might not go the way we want it to go, and why are we doing this anyway? And afterwards, they said it'll rally again and conquer again, maybe once or twice, and then it'll collapse internally, and that's exactly what's going to happen.
I mean, I think since Vietnam, after they basically run out of Vietnam, they've been bogged down in these wars in the Middle East for what, 2-3 decades now, and they're not winning anything. They're not winning anything. And it's certainly not.
It's a 30 years war,
Yeah, certainly not the hearts and minds.
Desert Storm, It's a 30 years war, and the U.S. and here's Trump again doing a saber rattling against Iran at the same time as Netanyahu has publicly said they might do a first strike on Iran, themselves from Israel.
Yeah,
anybody who's sitting thinking, say, wait a minute here, do you realize what they're talking about here?
Yeah, so I said to somebody here recently, do you think going to war with China is a good idea? Do you think that's really going to end well? For anybody. But I don't
remember Anthony Sutton.
Yeah.
was it with the guy who came out with the real deep studies on the true trilaterals, you know.
He did the books on who funded it, who funded
but also he also came out with the history before it was called the Trilateral Commission, you know. And he goes into Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution, how Wall Street funded the Bolsheviks. I mean, that's a fact, and he gives all the data and the details and facts there. It's not speculation. It's not some author's take on something. It's actual evidence. And then he had two. He had the one about who funded Hitler, you know, and another book called "The Best Enemies Money Can Buy." How you always fund them up into prominence, then you get the wars going. And we've all lived through, if we're awake at all, the transference of all your factories to China with free trade, and the GATT treaty and so on. And I did talks on them years ago when it was happening. I said, doesn't anybody notice that all your factories are literally uprooting physically, going over to China? They're even sending, in Canada, they were sending foremen over from different factories to train the people over there as their factories were getting moved. And we paid, under the treaty, the free trade treaty, same with India at the moment, free trade, we paid these factories and these corporations to physically move and put up their offices and their factories over there. Yeah, and we paid for 15 years afterwards under the treaty. If they claim they've lost money because of the move, you know, in the 15 years, then they pay no taxes, and they can for 15 years, and then they can actually renew it for another 15 years, so they never pay taxes. Yeah, and then they make stuff cheap over there, and then sell it back to us again. The same money. That's what free trade is all about. And now we're doing the same thing with India, and a whole bunch of other countries, by the way. And we're paying for the postage. Look at the stuff from China. Folk think it's wonderful. Oh, I can order this from China online, and I get this come back within a week, and it only costs about $1 or $2. I can't post a letter here for that kind of thing. We're paying for it all. Our tax money pays for China's posting the stuff to us under free trade.
Yeah, it's like
yeah.
Yeah, it's like the Indian guy who's the head of the IPCC at one time, and he was high up in the executive of Tata, getting all those the coal burning plants and all the rest of the steel plants all shipped over to India and rebuilding them again for free. And yet he was talking about climate change.
Was it Pachauri too that was head of IPCC?
Pachauri, yeah. That's what I'm talking about.
And yes, right. He got a massive grant, and he opened up coal mines in India.
Yeah, and steel plants.
That's right. I remember doing the talk years ago on that thing.
Yeah, and
it's a complete farce.
The guy who was writing pornographic novels in his spare time.
And grabbing the women publicly, you know, I don't know what he was on. The same stuff as that other guy that used to be with the World Bank. He was.
Probably watching too much.
These drugs for hypersex, these characters, you know.
They're probably watching too much television. He's watching too much television.
Well, he certainly enacts out what he was seeing, you know.
Yeah, I was talking about the drugs and stuff. It makes you wonder how screwed up these guys are that join the army and they're over there actually see what's been done. I remember the picture that came back when I think the Iraqis were trying to leave Baghdad or one of the other cities that had been bombed, and there's a whole line of them, maybe a mile long, of these trucks that they just strafed with whatever they'd strafed them with, and the bodies were basically caramelized. And I can't understand why young men can see that on the televisions when and then they'll see the ads to join the army or the navy or whatever it is, and think, well, wait a minute, that could happen to me.
They did the studies back in the 70s and the 80s on all the coming video games, you know, even before you got the really good ones coming out. They did lots of studies. They had ones out, by the way, for the military. Years before, they even had them just at the end of World War II onwards, got better and better. They're kind of video types, but they were actually for training people to kill, because it's not easy to train folk to actually do the killing. You can go through the movements and so on, but when you actually kill someone, it's a different thing. And unless you enjoy it and you're a psychopath, you know. But they had these incredibly good games. They started off with the ones for World War II aircraft for shooting down enemy planes, and they had real footage in these kind of video things, you know. And then they went on and on from there. Then when it came all digital into internet, they gave the plans to Japan. Japan started to lead the whole charge for making more improved video games, very realistic. And the Department of Defense of the U.S. funded it, most of it. And then they did the studies on Pac-Man even, and other ones as well, to see if it was addictive to the youngsters. And they studied them all from the age of maybe 5 right up until 20 to see if it made any difference on their psyche and how they viewed the world or anything. And they did. They had more blunted feelings regarding humans themselves, and they got more and more realistic. They were invented for the military initially. Then started selling to the public because they wanted, and I gave the talks, it says they're going to raise a generation up for the military with these games. And sure, now they actually have these articles out there saying from Xbox to the battlefield, you know.
Yeah, wasn't it Arnold Schwarzenegger that did a tour of one of these factories with all these war games and stuff, and he said this was I think it was the governor of California at the time, and saying how good it was to train the children.
Yes, and that's what it's for, training a generation. And sure enough, you've had them across the Middle East now, you know. Literally just for years and years and years. They trained them in advance, and they did documentaries only a few years ago. They're talking to some of them who were playing on the Xboxes, who were going into the military, and even took you into some of the recruitment offices where they have the same games in the recruitment offices for them to play with. So they go in there every day and they'll play and walk out, and eventually they get to know the recruiting sergeants, and then they get talked into it, you know.
Yeah,
it blunts your empathy. They're so used to seeing heads explode in a virtual world that it's nothing at all in real life.
Yeah, I often wonder if these young adults, children, I see people 40 years old have been playing these games and you think, what are you doing, you know? And it makes me wonder if when they're playing online, they're supposed to be playing with their friends, and there's all this fake battle scene. It makes you wonder if that's a training exercise going on, and you get a knock at the door one day, and they say, I believe you're very good at whatever it is, some murder game or whatever. Sure. Says, how do you fancy coming to work with us for a little while?
Well, you said that, and it's happened because it was maybe 4 or 5 years ago. There was articles out there. Actually ads from the Department of Defense where they were buying a lot of these used games that had the recordings of the users in them and the different systems they set up themselves, the users, for the battles and all that. And they'd actually analyze them to see the difference of that generation's mentality and their ability to possibly kill in real life as to the people who had never had that before, the previous generations that didn't have the games, you know.
Yeah,
so you're quite right, actually. They're putting millions too. They're millions of dollars are putting out to buy them back, these games.
Yeah, a number of years ago, Paula's son took part in an exercise he was in high school at the time, wasn't even in college, and it was run by the military, and they were to design a system to hack into a computer. Yes. And a few weeks later, there was a knock at the door from the military saying, could they speak to their son? And she told them where to go. But that's what they're doing. They're going around the schools and setting up these little exercises to find out who's got the capability to do this, that, and the next thing. But for any specific thing they want them for, they have their name and address, and they come knocking on your door.
That's right.
It's just...
And again, the parents think they can't quite relate to it. Think, well, it's a game, it's just a game, and they can't really. They don't realize the effect it has on the mind when you're getting trained to go out and slaughter, and that's what it's about, truly. You see, modern warfare is nothing like the old Hollywood movies of the 1920s and 30s, or World War I or II. Modern warfare is generally not going up against real organized armies, no matter what they've said in the past, in the recent past. You've got really ragtag armies that you're invading their countries, and you're going into civilian populations and policing the populations. That's not what the army's for. It's completely changed, And so you're regarded as the oppressors, if you can't give a valid reason as to why you're there, then you're the evil guy.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And they really can't. I mean, they can't. We know it was a complete farce with Afghanistan because they were ready to go into Afghanistan before 9/11 happened. It was all drawn up and had troops and so on all set to go. So that was part of that was one of them on the list of the PNAC group from the 1990s, the same group that took over with Bush Jr. when he got in. And so it was all that whole list of countries was on the list to be taken out by the PNAC group. And really, the people of America had no wars with the Middle East at all. No reasons for them. Not personally, they didn't.
There's only a couple of countries left. There's Iran, and is it North Korea or I can't remember.
Yeah,
and
there's still the U.S. is still, and so is Britain, still funding the terrorist organizations they're calling freedom fighters against Syria.
Yeah.
I mean, we've been funding. This is the other thing too. This is an idea of a collective punishment in a sense. If you look at some old religions, there's some real heavy discussions in old religions and theology about collective punishment. Judaism has it. If you're Jewish, regardless of your non-participation in anything underhand or whatever, you still collectively will get punished. This is part of it. It's the same thing if you look at Protestants versus Catholics to an extent as well. Even if you've got a radicalized group, a small faction in one or the other doing all that dirty stuff, the whole lot will get punished collectively, in the world's eyes. Well, it's the same thing if you're sitting back watching for years and years, munching on your chips and so on, and your crisps, as you say in Britain, but and watching this stuff going on, you're paying for all that.
Yeah, I remember
and eventually it comes back to hit you collectively. That the world is going to hate you.
Well,
for just sitting back and funding it all.
Yeah, but I mean, we're getting a form of collective punishment now. If somebody breaks a curfew or something, then the whole city's locked down, kind of thing. Sure. So you've got to point the finger at the bad guy for going out to the pub after 10 o'clock at night or something. But well, in Scotland, they're encouraging you to report your neighbour if you see too many of them in the garden next door. It's just it's getting bizarre.
Well, but if the folk don't stand up against it, again collectively.
Yeah.
It's got to be, and everybody says no. I gave this talk back in 1998. You got to relearn a word that's called no.
Mm-hmm.
That's all. Don't explain it as to anything, and just say it no.
Yeah.
And that's how that's the only way. If enough folk do it, they can't put everybody in prison.
Yeah.
Because
well, exactly. I've always said the same.
What they have planned for the people is hell.
Yeah.
This is not going to stop. I've watched trains go by here. The houses shake. They've never had such heavy. This is goods of canned stuff and so on going to the bases further north there for NORAD. That's where they are. Mm-hmm. It's further north of me. Underground bases, and you're for the stuff I've never seen so many trains in all the time years I've been here. Every day maybe 20, 25, sometimes 30 heavy suckers, miles long, and it's not going to stores, believe you me. And what you're looking at here is quite a few years of massive lockdown.
Yeah, well, they put reports out saying that this is going to go on until 2024, 25. So there's your
definitely.
Yeah, I mean, if it goes on that long, it's going on indefinitely. And
you see, this is to change the whole structure of existence.
Yeah,
it isn't. COVID is just an excuse. It's the whole sustainability idea, total lockdown, post-democratic societies. That's a big part of it. And they've said at the Club of Rome. The Club of Rome is like the big think tank that manages the cultural changes for the elites. And they've said it, that the whole agenda for sustainability that they couldn't get people to comply with through the climate agreements and so on. Cut back on food, cut back on farming, cut back. We can implement it through the COVID, and they're just overjoyed with what they're doing. And they've already started it. They said that they wouldn't allow businesses to open up, any kind of business, unless these unelected panels in your community see at first what you do, and are you wasting materials, are you causing carbon, blah, 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 and they're actually not allowing certain businesses to start up again.
Yeah, well, you've got it. Well, just before I go into that bit, we've had a report come out, not a report, somebody tweeted something out that they'd seen UN vehicles coming into Cork Harbour yesterday. And there's a bit of speculation about what they're for, but they could just innocently be troops coming back from some exercise or whatever.
Cork, was it? Yeah.
Cork, yeah.
Yeah, well, see, Ireland is one of the biggest suppliers of troops for the United Nations, and they go off with their white armoured vehicles. They train in Ireland. They're based in Ireland, most of them, and they're a big part of it. I know some guys in it, in fact. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, going back to, well, we're talking about Agenda 2030 now. Gavin Newsom in California, he said he's going to get rid of sales of petrol cars by 2035. So, I mean, 15 years. And, you know, I've said to people here, what are you going to do when they come for your cars? And they say, well, they won't do that. Well, there you go. There's California already. And 15 years is not a long time. You know, that's...
No, my mom used to say, you know, she was kind of up on the kind of cultural part, at least all the stuff that was getting pushed out of California or Hollywood. And she says all social cancers that start, they all start in California and spread out to the rest of the world.
Yeah.
That's where anything that's avant-garde and progressive all starts in California, and it gets pushed outwards. And that's so true. I've watched it my whole life, you know.
Yeah, well, I guess the Irish government's taken that on board because the national bus company there, Bus Éireann, have decided they're not going to supply buses between cities anymore. So there's your lockdown going to be implemented for every city, and you won't be able to get out. There'll be roadblocks, as there have been already in Ireland, stopping you going from getting out of Dublin or getting into Dublin.
Sure.
And I think there's talk of them doing the same thing in Cork as well. So who knows what those UN troops are for? Well, maybe they are there for Cork. Who knows? But
they'll let them loose at the right time. Yeah.
Yeah.
And don't forget too that what Kissinger said in his talks in California, was it 1970s or 80s? Can't remember now. But he said that he was giving a talk to an audience in California, and he said he was talking about the United Nations, and the people were all boo-booing. We don't want the United Nations in here. It's a communist organization. So he says that if under the right circumstances of famine or starvation, or the like, he says you'll welcome them, including Chinese troops if need be. That's what he said. Eh?
Yeah.
You can actually find his speech up there. Yeah, I put it up years ago. But yeah, I mean, their reality, the ones who helped plan all this, are completely different from the people at the bottom. And it's like the CIA. The CIA was never there to help Americans. You know,
there was a
agenda.
You know, there's people in Trafalgar Square on Saturday saying that when these police officers came in, after, you know, to charge the crowd, said many of them looked Eastern European. They didn't appear to be English police officers. So where they came from is anybody's guess. Like that's go back to European.
I'll tell you, the same thing happened in New York after 9/11. I know from some people I knew personally there who were in touch with me at the time. And one woman who was a nurse down there, she'd applied for if you were afraid of asbestos and so on, so you could put your name in and you'd get a special vacuum cleaner for your apartment or your house, and she fell for that and went for it. Well, she was there one day, and this kind of SWAT team came in, but all actually kind of Far Eastern looking people, and there's a woman in charge with these black outfits like something from a sci-fi magazine. And they had a GPS with them, and into the room, the whole thing, and told her to stay where she was. And they did a location thing. They weren't interested. They said they were there to check the vacuum cleaner that she'd got. Absolute nonsense. Didn't even look at it. But they were all heavily armed, by the way, you know. Yeah. But I heard it from other people too that I knew at the time that they didn't know each other, so they gave me the same stories of the same things happening to them in different parts of New York. You know.
Yeah, so they said they appear to be Eastern European. I don't know how they ascertained that. It said, but they were very young, and I mean, if they're very young, they're highly unlikely to be trained riot officers because they tend to be a little bit more experienced. But
sure.
and they said they had manic, staring eyes and were aggressive right from the start, beating their truncheons in their hands and all this kind of thing to rile up the crowd and all this kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah, you've definitely got them. Some of them were caught years ago here. when they did the anti-globalist agendas, when they were having the globalist meetings, and they had huge student demonstrations at the time in Canada and in the States. And I remember in Montreal, I think it was Montreal, they had one of the big globalist meetings where they publicized them, etc. And it was just the WEF group that went there too. They managed it all. But I remember you had the same kind of characters that would turn up at these meetings with the masks on. Folk thought they were Antifa, you know. This is years ago, and dressed exactly the same way. But these were the only ones who threw gasoline bombs at cop cars, and they did it in Montreal. Well, they caught 4 of them, and some of them saw the photographs in the papers and had combat boots on, these guys. So looked into it, for sure enough, and they were they were members of a very secretive unit for the police in Montreal. They were doing the actual firebombing.
Yeah, I remember the pictures they showed you, the soles of the boots, and they're all exactly the same.
That's right.
The same treads.
That was a clue that for folk to investigate further. But you definitely have a supra, I don't want to call it a supra force already established to deal with international terrorism, including if the public themselves are declared the terrorists, like the general public. It's already out there. They're trained and all the rest of it. Yeah.
Well, we are going to be declared terrorists if we don't take a vaccine.
Well, yeah, absolutely. If you don't do what you're told with not just the vaccine, there's a whole slew of things they want you to obey.
Yeah.
And it's not going to stop. This is a whole new way of living, and it's going to be getting ordered every day as to what to do and what not to do. And this is the authoritarian system.
Yeah.
It's post-democratic. Yeah.
I mean, a lot of so-called protests in the past did come from students. And in Scotland now, you've got this Nicola Sturgeon, this real maniac leading the country and locking students up in their dorms. And then she's kind of backtracked a little bit because there was big pictures put out of these student accommodation places to put them in now look like prisons anyway from the outside. And they all had signs in the windows saying, "Help me, Mum," and all this kind of thing, and "Let me out," blah, blah, blah. But what does it take for students nowadays to actually get out in the street and say, "We've had enough, we don't like the way this is going"?
A shot of testosterone, I think, you know.
And that's just for the girls.
Well, here's the thing, you know, I can joke about it, but the people are way high now in estrogen, you know, males too.
Yeah.
And way higher than they used to be. And again, constant studies, they keep giving the same reports and updating them every year or so. And it ties in with the male infertility, you know. Interesting, I don't know if you noticed, when the COVID thing came out, there was a massive campaign to terrify the West, no doubt about it, with complicity of China. And that's what I said at the time. I said, are they all in it together, China and the US, you know, all working together to terrify their own people? And I really think it is that way. But anyway, they did give the reports out with the initial COVID-19 idea. And they said that it affected the testes of men and could actually cause permanent damage, you know. I thought, well, what coincidence! If this virus can actually do a bit more infertility advancement for the elite, and add to the rest of the problems we've got, because you've already got a lowered sperm count, and what's left in the West is very low motility. It's most of them are half dead. The ones that are still moving, the spermatozoa, you know. So.
Well, then, going back to what you were talking earlier about men wearing spandex and things, I mean, it's been very, very obvious over the last, at least a decade anyway, that young men, school-age men, college, whatever, are very effeminate, a lot of them.
Yep.
And act effeminately. They hang about with girls, but not in the way like we would have done 50 years ago.
Yeah.
You know, they're hanging about with girls as if they're the same as them.
Yes.
You know, they've all got the same interests. They all watch the same celebrities. They all follow all that junk. They don't. There's no distinction between male and female in terms of attitudes or anything.
I gave the talks back in the 90s on misogyny. That was part of the reason for you to not just look alike, you'd behave the same ways and so on. And again, through the school system, where they with a massive campaign to stop what they call bullying, right? But it wasn't just bullying. Any young guy that sits on his rear end for a few hours in a classroom at the age of 6 or 7 is going to be tapping his feet or something, because young guys normally climb trees, and do things like that. You've got this energy. That's what you do. Well, they wanted the males to conform like the females. Huge studies were done on how to make the guys comply. Well, they came out with all the different new fabricated diseases of ADHD and so on, and hyperactivity. And for hyperactivity, they gave them amphetamine. Making it, so if the child wasn't hyperactive before, well, he's better now. He's on speed. Well, I've watched this, and everybody's been shaking their heads watching it. And of course, what does it do too? It literally shrinks the brain as it's developing. These guys never mature properly. Their IQ drops. But this is the studies that prove it. It's not my opinion here. And can you believe that the whole generation really, actually, it's going to the second generation of male leaders were completely nullified when teachers just got fed up with someone asking questions and got to see a doctor and get prescribed, to put them on drugs.
I got into a lot of trouble.
That's your leadership generation out the window. Yeah.
I got in trouble for asking questions at school a long time ago, and I guess that put me off school for a long time until I went back to college and then university, and I asked a lot of questions there, and they didn't like it either. So nothing had changed really. But yeah, students, I don't know. It's
you've been in a war. You've been living in a war your whole life long. Most folk don't realize it. They think all these things are unrelated. No, these are all parts of the war.
Yeah. But as you mentioned before, all these nonsense degrees that they bring out now, flower arranging and just ridiculous beauticians coming out. Yeah, whatever. And people actually, the parents of these children must think, oh, well, there'll be a job in that. Yeah, well, really? What job?
I know.
It's crazy. And they don't know anything. You try and talk to some of these children, and you're talking to a wall. There's nothing coming back at you,
Yes.
In the way of any intelligent conversation. And for the most part, there are exceptions, of course.
They did the studies too. Lots of them can't even look another human being in the eye.
Yeah.
You see, they're not used to. They've been raised just to texting people and so on, and they're not used to actually talking and conversing in real life with people.
Yeah. Well, they're trying to tell them now that looking somebody in the eye is an aggressive posture.
This is straight off the manuals of ancient China and Britain, by the way, because nobility's never allowed, royalty's never allowed the peasantry to look the people, their betters in the eye. That was you could get chained and whipped for that,
I think that still goes on.
Britain was the same. Queen Elizabeth I had a lot of them done that way because it looked her in the face. So did Hillary Clinton. You know that too, eh?
Yeah, I think it's the same in today in Buckingham Palace. I think they've got to walk past with their head bowed, and they're not allowed to walk on certain sides of the corridor and all this kind of thing.
It's subservience, you see. It's just politeness. It's subservience.
Yeah, and it's getting that way with the politicians as well. They're all adopted this what's his name, Mussolini type posture, with the raised chin and the looking down the nose at you. So you can't even look them in the eye because they're looking down at you. They're not looking at you. They're looking over your head.
And again, too, it's interesting, that whole phenomenon, because when you look at how the communists, the early communists were quick off the mark in adopting the Germanic filmography techniques for propaganda purposes. And a lot of old silent ones on the hero type, the new Soviet hero. But you see the techniques that were used. And the hero, a little guy, would start off in his little peasant village. And as the time went on, he became the hero and kept factories going single-handed and stuff like that. The camera shots took him from below to look like a giant, you see. And so they made the screen bigger. And then the same thing happened with Germany, with Leni Riefenstahl, She did the Triumph of the Will, was it called, that movie? And she used techniques too, and she made everybody look like giants, with the shots that she took and the angles. And this is no mistake what you're talking about now. almost everybody out there's got these massive giant screens, and it's all catering to them to make these folk look superhuman.
Yeah. Well, it's that I can't remember the name of the movie, but Inglorious Bastards or something it was called.
Oh, yeah.
And it was about the war, and that Wiesenthal was mentioned in that. The lady in that owned a cinema, and she was having this Wiesenthal season. And exactly as you said there, they got this young soldier guy, and he was a great marksman, and they made him into this great sniper. And he'd murdered 50, 60 of the enemy, blah, blah, blah. And all the camera angles were like that. They were looking up to him, and he was up in the clock tower, and he was a big hero. All exactly the same way as the movies were done in the 40s.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly the same way.
Mm-hmm.
And they're doing the same with the politicians, of course. Exactly the same
Yeah, they give you the big screens, high definition, and then they seem larger than life, including the celebrities that everybody's stuck on, you know. Mm-hmm. They actually get embarrassed when they see them in real life for being pretty short or maybe even a bit pudgy, you know, and some things like that. But the TV screens make them look like they're giants and superhuman, and that's intentional too. Then you follow the stars, you know, that's why they make them stars. Yeah. And the nobodies follow the stars because they haven't found out that they're somebody themselves yet. That's what they do.
Yeah, well, again, go back to the students. I mean, that's all they've been brought up with. They've been brought up with this whole culture of celebrity their whole lives, and they don't
and
see any
too,
real
here's
people.
Another big thing too. I remember talking to people years ago, and they were teaching at universities. It was a discussion about the future for the youngsters of the West. And as it turned out more and more ridiculous degrees, the competition rises all the time. Because with the amalgamation, which again goes back to the 1930s for the CFR group, for the amalgamation of the third world countries into the first world countries, they knew that this is so interesting, really. The families that would succeed, you said, in the 1930s. This is your own elite, you know, talking here, the ones that manipulate and manage things. They said that the families from countries like India and China, they'd still have intact family units. But the ones in the West would be degraded as they progress towards a different system. Well, naturally, they actually said that the children would be far more successful for the ones in the family units from China and India than the ones in the West, as the ones in the West became more freer. and sure enough, you look at the students from China in the West and the ones that come over from India, their children they'll study like crazy compared to the West, and that they have decent homes where there's not screaming and argument or whatever, or the problems there are drugs. And so they are getting used at the moment for the middle class bureaucracies that are running over us, actually.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned
it was planned all that time ago. It's just astonishing to sit and watch it for your whole life long.
Yeah, you mentioned Indian people, and it is amazing because everyone you meet from, well, call it a middle class family if you like, they are a very cohesive family unit, and they're all like doctors and lawyers, and they're all very well qualified people. Because they have that kind of, I don't know what to call it, strict, yeah.
It's so important that the war on the family was done on the West. Mm-hmm. It's still on the go, what's left of it, but I mean, it's pretty well demolished, the family.
Yeah. I mean,
if you have parents, and the parents can get on in some kind of order, right? There's an order at home, so it's not screaming, hollering on drugs and all the rest of it, or alcoholism. Or affairs all over the place. If you have a stable family at home of order, the child grows up with a greater ability to be a good achiever. You know,
yeah.
You can't do it. You can't study at home when there's chaos. You
know? No, and you tend to stay at home longer willingly because of the environment.
Well, here's the thing too. I mean, both China and India, especially, I'd say, they put up more for their children, you know. They would sacrifice more for their children financially. The West went through so much deprivation even before the World Wars. You know, the Boer War, World War I, Great Depression, and the World War II. rationing even after World War II, etc. You had broken families all over the place. Wars caused incredible shock to the system of everybody growing up in it, And then you hit it with deliberate plans to destroy the family unit, and bingo, you're going down the tubes as other ones are coming in to replace you and take over with stable families. But in Britain, the biggest thing that I heard in Britain from parents all over the place, and the friends I knew and so on, the parents wanted them out of the home as soon as they get them out of the home. They did not have the financial backing to even have the children back then. Children, because you were living in pretty well poverty after years of wars and Great Depressions.
Yeah, and of course there's if you talk about China and the villages, the Indian villages, all the children there are and they're they're valuable to the family as a working unit, as a working unit.
And that's what. Here's the thing, though: that the ones who wanted you all to destroy understand all this. It was a purposeful thing to destroy the West. Nothing happened by it. Always under the guise of freedom. It was a complete war spelled out by at least the very least you get the communist signs of it spelling it all out. And it's a deliberate war using Gramsci said you'll use culture, entertainment, everything to do it all. And they did it. And then they signed all these agreements to take all your work away from you. So you've got an even higher concentration of youngsters with degrees and no work to go and use them in. I can remember when we were training Chinese in the West in colleges and universities as engineers and sending them back to China, and they had no factories to go back to at the time because it was in the wind that we were going to finance it and ship our factories to them. Everything's planned this way on such a massive scale. It's not happenstance.
No, it makes you wonder what's going to be left in the West in the next 10 or 15 years.
Right down,
yeah. I mean, there's got to come a point where people do get genuinely disgruntled because they'll have nothing left to lose once they've lost everything,
that's right.
including their family and their home and all the rest of it.
Freedom is just another word for nothing left to lose.
Yeah. But they've just announced, I think they're going to do away with this mortgage or rent moratorium, and they've extended it in some places. But you've got landlords saying, "Hold on a minute, I pensioners, I worked all my life to buy those 2 apartments, so I would have an income when I was older, and now you're telling me that nobody has to pay me any rent anymore for those." And it's going both ways, and the people who did get money to pay the rent just chose not to pay it, and yet they're allowed to do as they please, and the poor guy who's paid for the apartment gets nothing, and that's his livelihood gone, and he probably lose his own house paying the rent on the other ones or the mortgage. And the same goes for
see, the world they want to bring in is prearranged. Everything's happening is prearranged. Is massive companies, maybe 5 companies, just like the agri-food businesses. You got five big agri-food businesses that run the world's food supply. Same thing with apartments and rentals. But the same thing they want to raise up that are already here, quietly sometimes, but they're here, and they'll own all rentals across the world. It's an old idea going way back, 100 years. And that's what they're going to do for the smaller ones. And there's people with a few houses who think they're still landlords. They're going to get done away with.
Yeah.
It's big corporations that are going to own, streets and streets and streets of them throughout the cities, like they do in New York and some places.
Well, I saw it in Bulgaria, where the old factories had been basically abandoned when the Soviets left, and they have the blocks built there specifically for the workers, and basically the government owned them. If they didn't do as they were told in their work, then they'd lose everything. They'd lose their work, their money, their accommodation, everything, and they'd be on the street.
Sure.
And maybe we're going back that way.
I'm sure we will, actually.
Yeah.
But I think it's even worse than that. What's arranged here? I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen troops going into action. Actually seen them going into action.
No, I've never been so unfortunate.
Yeah, because there's a character change comes over them, and commanders. as they're going into it. And it's that term resolute, a resolute grasp of things, very resolute. It means more than the word that it's so easy to say it, but it's a tangible thing, And it's when this is it, this is it moment, and it's all or nothing, And by the way, there'll be no Geneva Convention when these kind of things take off. That's how it really happens. But what you're seeing today is a look that they have from the higher commanders. It's an all or nothing look. It's a hard thing to explain, but you're seeing it now. You're talking about the politicians in Australia, etc., actually coming out and saying this. We've got to be more authoritarian now. You're seeing that same look. That does not bode well for the general population. And I think what they've got in mind here to completely eradicate, and again getting back to year zero afterwards, I think you're going to see starvation going over a few years here as they bring us down and down and down, until whoever's left will beg them to bring in the plan that they've had on the shelves for years.
Well, the United Nations. They'll be begging for the United Nations on the street.
Yes.
And it's funny that people here say, well, we've still got our guns, we've still got this and that. I says, well, when you don't have any food, you'll quite quickly hand your guns over.
That's right.
And, oh, no, we'll never do that. We'll never do that. I said, well,
you can't eat them.
You can't eat them, exactly.
If you ever go into a place where there's starvation happening, in different parts of Africa, and a long, long time ago, you get it in Bangladesh and different places, but it's nothing like you'd think it was going to be. You don't see fanfare. You see lots of trucks coming back and forth. You see a quietness, and you go into villages, and there's folk in the streets dying, and it's the silence that gets you. It's not noisy. It's not folk screaming. They're past the stage of asking for help or expecting it, And I could see it happening here, and yet you could sit there with your rifles and all the rest of it as you're starving to death. You're way too late by then to use them.
Well, yeah, unless you're going to shoot something to eat, that's about all you can do.
Right.
But
I can see that. I can see that as part of the plan, eventually to make us buckle under until any memory of how it used to be is utterly eradicated. That's the intention here: brute force eradication of memories of a different time.
Yeah, I mean, it's as you know, I'm trying to grow what I can grow, but it's very difficult to grow anything in any kind of general bulk here. I mean, you're only talking, salad, vegetables, and beans and things like that. You can't grow enough to live on. I mean, it's you grow what you can this summer or spring or whatever, but you can't grow meat. I mean, you can't grow all the essentials you need. And certainly not water. I mean, if they cut the water supply off, you're screwed. I mean, that's it. 2 days without water, 3 days. In Florida summer, maybe 1 day. As you say, you could see them going around in a truck with water bottles on the back, saying, "Okay, we know you've got a gun. You just hand that over, and we'll give you a case of water today." And that's the way it'll go.
They did that in New Orleans when they had when the booms went, and the water flooded in. The trucks were around the houses. The soldiers were around the houses to evacuate people in some of the areas, and some of the better areas too. And they weren't allowed to take anything with them. And when they come back, of course, all their guns were gone. They even took the animals and brought them into big halls, like town halls and so on, and machine gunned them. I don't know if people realise that, as we did with the pets.
Yeah.
But I mean, you got to start maturing very quickly here when you see what's going on here.
Well, it's
very, very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, going back to the students, not older people would have relied on their children to defend them in times of times of strife, but the generation now that's coming up, the 18, 20-year-olds, they're not going to defend anybody because they're incapable, basically.
Yes, and they're disconnected. The bonding they're completely disconnected. They've been trained from school Just like the old technique where they were quite blatant in the 60s and 70s, don't trust anybody over 30. Then they kept reducing the age until the children could only relate to teachers around 20 years old, and then you could indoctrinate the children much easier with them. Everything's worked out scientifically here, but the general public have been broken. You've been broken with your bonding to each other. The internet society has helped destroy it as well. You've got lots of people out there in the chat rooms and stuff, but you've never met anybody in real life, you know who's real and who isn't real. And you tend to neglect the folk who are around you as irrelevant. It's quite amazing to study it and watch it.
Well, now the students, school children are being taught that they can't even speak to each other anymore. They've been segregated even down to that level, even down to kindergarten. Yeah. They're not even allowed. And that generation.
Here's the thing too, with so many families that are the single parent families. It's gone for such a long time, and the guy's absent, and even if the guys are around, they're generally quiet because they've been trained in school that the whole world's problems is theirs. They're just another generation of men that's caused all these problems. That's how they're trained, to shut up in school and come to consensus with the group in the school, consensus groups and so on, and they've been trained literally that women are the leaders. You'll see that everywhere you look. And look at all the riots across the states, and mayors coming out and telling everybody to stand down and let that happen. And the guys are all shutting their faces and saying nothing here. I mean, it's because they've been trained not to say anything. They've been trained that they are irrelevant, by the way. And then you add into it the hyper estrogen that's in their system, and the lower sperm count. As things start to fall into place, big time.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, even bringing it down to the most basic survival, if you like. Even if they had food, most youngsters these days wouldn't know what to do with it.
I know.
They wouldn't know how to cook.
I knew somebody. I knew somebody from the States, and who did well for herself, And she said to me, quite proudly, she says, I've never cooked in my life, she says. I was proud, very proud. Meaning you don't have to, you see. A society that was doing okay in certain cities and certain areas and classes, the end thing was to always eat out. If you had to cook for yourself, you were obviously falling ranks in the class structure. But she proudly boasted to me that she could make a grilled cheese sandwich, And I thought, wow, I think that's what it's come down to today. They can't even feed themselves if they had to,
Yeah, there was there was a little videos put up there, and there was two teenage boys, or teenage, I don't know, maybe late teens, and they were given a dial-up telephone, an old dial-up telephone, and asked if they could make a phone call. Yeah. And it took them about half an hour to work it out, and they had to be told at the end how to make it work. And the same goes with cooking. I think there's no basic knowledge instilled in them, because, as you say, I mean, there might be single parent families, there might be whatever, but in America for sure, a lot of people eat out all the time. All the time. Really. And I can't understand how all these places survive. But then you look and think, well, they've all got people in them, so that's maybe that's
too. They don't realise that you've been trained to be helpless in an emergency. What you do, if that, and look at them now with all these restaurants folding, deliberately getting put under. Whoa.
And it's not just the mom and pops that are going under either. A lot of these the Dunkin' Donuts, McDonald's, Burger King, they're all closing hundreds of stores all over the country. It's not just the small ones, but of course that's just consolidation, isn't it? Yes. And sharing it out amongst themselves, the big chains, I guess. Mm-hmm. And it'll only be them left. But I guess when it's only them left, they could put up the prices again, just make it even harder to eat out. If that's all you've got.
See, they don't plan on going back to a consumer society. No. Where you've got a variety of choices and buying things and so on. So they're actually fulfilling it with using COVID as an excuse, you see. Mm-hmm. And so this is the post-consumer society. And of course, the new industrial revolution is not replacing it with anything to help you.
Well, it's not replacing it with industry. It's not replacing it with industry, so I don't know why it's even called an industrial revolution, because I guess it's a revolution to destroy industry, I guess, put it that way.
Yes, and also to fool people,
Yeah.
Because everybody's waiting, they're going to replace it with something. No, this is the complete ultimate. The Club of Rome, years ago, and their publications from the very beginning, actually, have said that democracy does not work. Now, they work on behalf of the elite that run the WEF, and they said that they have to bring in a system of authoritarianism to get things done, and that the old system is gone. The old system of work is gone, commerce is gone, and to replace it with a new system of emergency powers, basically. That's what they're talking about.
Yeah.
And you're in it now.
I'll carry on.
Yeah, well, I was going to say they published their books starting off about 1970s onwards,
Yeah.
reiterating the same thing.
Well, I left school in 1979, and we were told then that look forward to the future because you'll have lots of leisure time, the paperless society,
That's right.
blah, 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 all this stuff. What they didn't mention is you'd have leisure because you wouldn't have a job and you'd be starving. But we're going to have plenty of leisure time. It's just that you won't be able to have any leisure because you'll be constantly struggling to survive. They missed that bit out.
Yeah.
And
that's what it is. But as I say, the West has been under attack, a deliberate, planned, with a massive bureaucracy working it like a battle plan at higher levels. There's no doubt about it. And what's happening now is what they said, that the people would not go along with the climate agreement. It would take too long. And so we need to get a more stricter measure to bring it. Well, COVID came along, that's it. That's the invention for it.
Yeah, it seems that we mentioned this the last time we spoke, that it seems to be the old British colonies that are bearing the brunt of this at the moment. Do you think?
Isn't that interesting? Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think some of these the Eastern European countries? I think we touched on this before last time as well. But I don't know if you know, in Bulgaria for the last, I saw this report the other day that for 70 days anyway, they've been on the streets and tens of thousands of people have been turning up every demonstration calling for the resignation of the Prime Minister or the President, whatever he's called. And as far as I was, I met that guy once when he opened a bridge up near where I was living. Dug the first sod and all that kind of thing. And he was an ex-mafia gangster's bodyguard. So that's the calibre of the heads there. But they wanted him out because they reckoned he'd sold them out to the mafia, basically. I'm not sure which mafia they were talking about, whether it was the European Union or just the elites or whatever. But
the CIA runs the mafia over there.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do, and again, the money that flows from the EU to make the roads and so on never gets there. It's always put in the papers. They're going to build this road and so many millions. It all disappears very, very quickly into these organizations that are the same organizations that are using in even Biden's son's involved in other parts of the area, the Europe.
Well,
same organization.
Yeah, as you know, I was there when they were building the bridge over the Danube, and I worked on that. And the Bulgarian workers were getting paid half the amount of money that was under contracts. The rest of it went in the back pocket of the company. That's FCC's Spanish company, which runs recycling. And I've noticed that even over here. And I'm beginning to wonder if that's what they built the bridge with, recycled stuff, because it's fallen apart already. It's only been there 10 years.
It probably is, yeah.
Yeah.
Probably is.
And yeah, that was going on back then, and it was pretty obvious it was all corrupt. And again, like you said, it was hundreds of millions of euros spent on this thing.
Yes.
And where it went, I don't know, because
no idea. It is massive. The EU again is a front where the commission at the top is pretty secretive. Most folks don't even know who's in it. You don't get to vote them in, And there's the fake ones down below. They're the politicians that can't even pass laws,
Yeah, I think they get 10 minutes a year to talk, something like
that. Yeah, and that's right, 10 minutes. Well paid for 10 minutes, absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's a complete farce. It's a front, and even a lot of the Soviet dissidents talked about it. It says that this is the real Soviet system. It's beyond what the old Soviet system used to be. It's totally corrupt at the top with a different agenda than the people will ever fathom out at all. Everything we live in today is over us, is there for a different reason. And it's part of a massive, it's like the big octopus idea or a spider's web, all connected across the world. And when you look at Ukraine, for instance, as I say, with the farces going on there, when you hear the people talking involved in the areas there, they all blame America and the CIA.
So does Bulgaria. So does Bulgaria. Yeah.
Sure.
That's what they're told to believe. But
and it's interesting too. Getting back to Norman Dodd, and the Rees Commission and all the rest of it, in the 1950s, they talked about all these non-governmental organizations. They're massive armies, really, with the leaders who live with pensions, like life pensions. These aren't little charitable things. These are massive armies that can be mobilized at any time across the whole planet. And the CIA's got his fingers and everything. And that's what they put Dawes and the rest of them wondered about. What is the CIA? It's never been explained yet. But it's part of the MI6, it's CIA, it's Mossad, it's a few other ones too, all combined. It's one massive system that really works on behalf of this real global elite at the top to plan the future. Yeah. And they use every country in turn to help push its agenda, and then they collapse it behind them. They collapsed Britain long ago, and now they're going to collapse America.
Yeah. Do you think these Eastern European type countries who still remember living under tyranny before, and a lot of them are on the streets now. I mean, elderly people as well who were repressed under Stalin, getting rolled out in wheelchairs and all sorts of things to protest. I mean, do you think those countries still instill that knowledge onto their children, and their children are probably a lot more politically aware than people in the West generally?
Yeah.
They don't buy the newspapers. They know the newspapers are all propaganda. The villages don't even sell newspapers. That's how much they disrespect them. Sure. But do you think it used to be, I think, believed that America could be the big stumbling block, because of the weapons, etc. But I can't see that happening. As we've just spoken about, they could take the guns off people very easily using food and water. But do you think the countries where their populations do get out in large numbers who aren't armed, is that going to possibly be like in Europe, in Eastern Europe particularly, where they can actually remember history, they're going to be the ones to stand up?
They have the potential to do it, absolutely. The potential is there, and they still have well, although they're getting hammered too, they still have more intact family units, not all together, but they're getting attacked as well. As the same cultural changes are forced upon them, by the way. But you'll notice that Putin, over the last few years, has been kicking out all the different NGOs that have been doing the same old stuff as the Colour Revolution types and the Pussy Riots and going to churches and destroying churches. When you see the same MOs, by the way, it was the same MO they were using for the ISIS fronts across the Middle East. The churches were getting absolutely massacred and destroyed. Churches that were gone way back to about 100 AD, and totally destroyed with utter hatred planned, and taxpayers' money from Britain and the States funded all that stuff, to happen. Well, you're seeing the same thing across Europe. You're looking at this strange conglomerate at the top, to say, of special secretive agencies and so on, funding and managing all this kind of stuff. But Putin saw it all, and he says, no way, and he kicked them out as enemies of the state, and that's what they should be declared here at home as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's not just Christianity being attacked. They recently announced they were going to make the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul into a museum.
Yeah.
And I can't understand why there's not been more protest against that even.
Yes.
It's incredible. I've been there, and you can't see that in any other context than being a place of worship.
That's right.
You're not going to go in there and say, "Oh, it's a nice museum." It's a huge part of the culture there, and I just don't understand why they've allowed that to happen. I think was it Putin or it's one of the other, maybe it was one of the Middle Eastern countries said that they couldn't believe that was being allowed to go ahead. I can't remember who it was, but yeah, it's again talking about religion. The students, young people, that they have no ties to religion anymore.
No.
Particularly UK, maybe more so in the States. In the more rural areas, but certainly not in the UK. I think you'd be hard pressed.
That people should remember, whether like it or not. It's nothing to do with liking something. The elite of the show that you're seeing today, at the top, that run it, the ones who manage it, the long-term strategy. Because this is a very old war. Their biggest enemy for centuries was religion, especially Christianity. That was their biggest enemy. All the planks, even in communism, that they had to follow, the destruction of the family unit and so on, man and wife, it was held together by the religious social sphere, you see. And that's why it's always been first to get knocked off. Once you knock that out of the way, everything's easier to demolish underneath it.
Well, it opens the door for all the evils to come in, I guess.
It's a big idea. This is the term. This is their terminology, a big idea. And Bush Sr. used this in his New World Order speech, remember? You can look it up online.
Yeah.
He says, I see a New World Order coming into view. And he says, it's a big idea, Bush Jr., 10 years later, said exactly almost the same speech, New World Order. And same date, by the way, And you're looking at part of the esoteric dictation that they put out for their own members across the world. No reporter even picked up and says, what do they mean by a New World Order? What's he talking about, a New World Order? Who's New World Order? What new big idea? Mao Zedong. Because these are all parts of the same revolutionary parties that do the left-hand path, right-hand path. They work together, dialectic, you see. And Mao Zedong said he wasn't afraid of anything. He says all power comes from the barrel of a gun. But when he was asked if anything that made him afraid, he says he's only afraid of a big idea. Well, see, his enemy could have a big idea too. And because the one thing that united folk and culture was religion.
Yep.
And once you have that behind you, you're unstoppable.
Yeah, well, that was pretty obvious back in Jerusalem when the Muslims, Christians, everybody lived together side by side, no problem at all, until the establishment decided that they wanted to start causing trouble amongst them. They couldn't. The worst thing that could possibly happen to the elites, I guess, is if all the religions in the world turned around and said, right, enough of this, we're all going to get together.
Here's the key, Neil. People can argue politics until the cows come home, if they even have cows in the future. They're planning to. Yeah. But the thing is, and they can argue all kinds of facts and factoids and theories and so on. But if everyone has a feeling of something bigger than themselves, that's a power, you see, way above arguments. And folk will go to the end for that particular backing of something bigger than themselves.
Yeah,
that's the big idea.
Yeah, we touched on good and evil the last time, and whether you're religious or not, you should all know the difference between good and evil.
Yes.
And evil, I think we mentioned, it's an entity, if you like.
Yes.
And physically manifests itself in people, and you can see it in the way they look, the way the look in the eye, that psychopathic kind of thing. And
have you seen the meltdowns that they put up there? Some of the women when Ginsburg died there. Yeah.
No, I've seen some of that, but it's madness. It's almost like North Korea.
They even showed you some meltdowns when Trump got in the first time.
Yeah. Well, it was the same with Obama.
That's not normal. I mean, that's not normal behavior.
No.
Yeah,
Well,
it's beyond rational. Yeah.
Yeah. People see that happening in North Korea when one of the leaders dies or something, and they're all standing there weeping, and they think, look at that. They've just made them do that. That's all fake. But no, maybe it's not. Maybe it's not. Yeah. Maybe they're just totally insane.
Yeah.
But
if people have an actual belief in something bigger than themselves, that's the one thing that tyrants are terrified of.
Mm-hmm.
That's the one thing. It can overwhelm all common sense. See, people will use this idea of common. Well, they've got all the guns, they've got all this power over us. But if folk have something to live for, here's the key: is to live for. That's bigger than just themselves, and nothing's going to stop them if they get on the march.
Yeah, I mean, it's like even the one guy in Tiananmen Square who stood in front of the tank.
Yes, absolutely.
And dared them to run him over. And the guy in the tank, I'm sure, was as brainwashed as the rest of the military, but he must have got something in his ear telling him, you better not do this, or they're going to be all over your tank and you're going to be dragged out in the street.
Right.
And that's what it takes. It takes people to stand up and, as you say, keep saying no, no, no all the time to anything and don't justify it.
They don't get it here. They've been played as suckers since this thing started, you see. Or just a few weeks, or just a few months, a few more months, and this is to go on for years, by the way, you know, and you can't keep saying, oh, maybe they'll back off and be kinder down the road. No, don't stop, don't go. They lied from the beginning. They're going to lie right through it, and it's going to get more and more evil, and evidently evil as time goes on, until you're too weak to do anything about it.
Yeah, well, they'll back off a little bit if enough people start protesting, and then they'll come back later on and just push again,
Yes,
because people tend to you know, they'll get one step forward, but then very quickly take two steps back again.
Yes, it's all psychological warfare, massively so. They've spent billions of dollars just on psychology and behaviorists to put this whole program across to the public, you know.
Yeah.
So they've tried to think of every possible way to con us. And don't forget at the beginning, this strange character, Fauci, who literally worked with the viruses that were sent over to Wuhan, you know. I mean, you couldn't make this up in a bad movie. And here he is. He told you at the beginning, he says, life will never go back to normal.
Yeah.
What part of that don't we understand?
Yeah, he must be clairvoyant.
Yeah, we live in hope, you see, that it's going to, of something that's familiar to us. But they've already told us it's not going to go back to normal.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's so much evidence coming out now. And as we started off, the guy from Pfizer, that you've got people on Sky News, even in Australia, questioning the numbers and all this, and why there's any need for lockdowns and all this.
Yes.
And maybe they're just covering their own backsides. Who knows? But
it's much bigger than that. They're not going to. I tell you, there's no way that it's going to back off unless the public say that's it.
Well, I mean, of course, the public's influenced by the television, and maybe it's going to be like what's his name? The clip from Network.
Yes.
Where he says, you know, you are reality. Yeah, you are reality, not the television.
Yes.
You are reality,
Uh-huh.
and stir the people up that way. I don't know, but maybe I said that to Paula. Maybe people just need to stop throwing bricks at mom and pop restaurants. They need to take over the TV stations and put some real information out and see how that goes.
Really.
Well,
what's coming down the pike is a long-term agenda that was planned for years and years and worked out every single part of it, consequences, reactions to every single part, like a massive chess game. And they've implemented it, and they're dead serious.
Yeah.
And now they'll go overboard. They're going to do head cracking in the streets shortly, you know, to terrify the public even more. This is a terror campaign. This is what the brutality of tyranny it turns into, is to get folk to comply. They'll do brutal things to make sure you all see it, to comply. And as that happens, that's when you start going after these goons. What was it? Don't forget what Solzhenitsyn said. He said when the NKVD, you know, used to come in the middle of the night and grab people, he says, out their homes and so on. He says there don't often only be 4 to 6 of them at a time. He says which have grabbed clubs, axes, pickaxes, everything. He says and gone for them right on the spot at the beginning. He says, and it would have stopped it right there.
Yeah. I think it was. I think he also said something about when you see that car parked in the street under the lamppost, you need to get out there and drag that guy out of his car and give him a good seeing to, basically.
Yes.
But
they were disappearing people and slaughtering millions over many years. Millions of folk were slaughtered.
Yeah, and he mentioned to people peeking out behind the curtains as cowards. They should have been out there and stopping it.
That's right.
When they had the chance to do it. And then, well, we all know what happened. But well, we've done our 2 hours again, Alan, very quickly.
Oh yeah, it's short, isn't it?
Yeah. So where does that leave us? Say no, I guess. Say no, 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 all the time.
I said it in the 1990s, 1998, I think I says, give a talk on it, what was coming down the pike, and I says, you'd learn to use no. We've been trained to be compliant, be nice and decent, to our own detriment, and you've got to start saying no. That's it.
I think it's and more important as well that when you say no, you just walk away and leave it at that. You don't even indulge in a conversation about it. You just walk off and leave them standing there wondering what to say next.
And also, when it comes to seeing people getting grabbed on the streets for whatever it happens to be, you've got to get the numbers and badge them, all the cops involved, because they must all get fired, and you must start taking action as collectively to get these characters, out of uniform.
Absolutely. I did see one clip from Trafalgar Square at the weekend where she looked like a middle-aged woman dressed in a business suit, and 4 or 5 of these thugs just got around her, threw her around the place like a pinball machine, and then just threw her to the ground, and nobody did anything.
Terrorization, that's what I'm talking about. This is intentional. They want the public to see that, to make you terrified it might happen to you.
Yeah.
And this is when you nip it right in the bud now.
Yeah. Okay, well, on that jolly note, what can you say? I mean, sometimes you just got to laugh and marvel at it in some sense, because it's genius. You can't knock them. They've thought this out pretty well, and
they've had all the time in the world to do it, and all the money, all our money to do it too.
Yeah. But it's got to be stopped, and that's the end of it. So, okay. Well, pleasure talking to you again. Well, always informative. And let me know if there's anything apart from yeast you need, and I'll see what I can do.
I will do,
Yeah. Okay, I'm glad you got it eventually. Okay, so with that, we'll sign off and be back on, what day is this? Wednesday. We'll be back on Sunday with news and views, and next Wednesday, we've got Walter Graham on, talking all things from GM foods, 5G, you name it. He's read up on a lot of it. Okay, with that, we'll say goodbye, but we can't help those. They just happen, and that's it. So until Wednesday, Paul will take us out with a piece of music, and till Sunday, losing track of the days. Till Sunday. Cheers.